This is episode 273 of the Reel Me In, a movie podcast. On this week's episode, Chase and Joel will take a look at the 2019 Dallas International Film Festival, the day-to-day experience, the highs and lows, what films worked, what films didn't, all that and more on today's Reel Me In.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Reel Me In, a movie podcast. This is one of your co-hosts, Joel Copling. Before I throw it to my co-host, just make sure to share, subscribe, all that jazz. You know how that works. This is episode 273. We are here to talk about the 2019 Dallas International Film Festival. And I am obviously not alone. The main host is here too. Chase, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Once again, we have the luxury of doing this in my kitchen area where we get to actually see each other, feed off of one each other, and not guess what you're going to say over Skype. It's fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a much better experience. Hopefully we're able to do this in the future more often. But yeah, it's going to be a fun episode. It's been an exhausting week, of course, because that's how this goes. Film festivals are generally pretty exhausting, and this is actually one of the shorter ones. So I can't imagine doing like New York. That's usually about 12 days. So yeah, we've seen roughly like an average of 12 movies. I've seen 13, and Chase has seen 11. So we're going to be talking about the day-to-day experiences, going through each movie. I'll be talking first about each movie since I'm sort of cowboying this episode. And then Chase will respond with his review and so forth.
And just let you guys know, usually we'll do like movie trailers and movie news. We're not doing any of that this week. It's strictly festival talk. So if you don't want to listen to this one, you want to just wait until Endgame next week, by all means go for it. But until then, just purely festival talk.
Yeah, he'll have a bunch of trailers to talk about since several have already dropped this week. So, and he's been keeping on top of it. I'm proud of our little Chase. Okay. So basically, this is how this is going to work. Again, I'm going to talk first about the movies that we've seen, and then Chase will respond with his reviews. And then also we'll fit in some of the other things that we did this week, because it wasn't just about the festival. We took Monday off from the festival.
Some new film experiences that you experienced?
Some stuff that I've done. I mean, we've talked about that before. I don't know if it was the festival where I had watched a few things. It probably was last year, but it was, I think, the December before that. We recorded an episode about a week after I'd come out for a few days, and I talked about how I'd seen a bunch of Judd Apatow movies. So it's all about the experience, just as much as it is about the festival. And I'm going to try to speak correctly from here on out.
You're still doing 110% better than me, so we're off to a good start. Listen, some of these are foreign films, and I'm sure you guys would laugh hysterically if I tried to pronounce them. That's why Joel is the MC on this episode, because I would fail in very spectacular form, so thank you.
I would laugh. I would just laugh hysterically, because I like laughing at Chase.
Well, and he did that to begin with, because I would film my reviews of each movie in the kitchen. He would be back in his room. I'm sure he was cackling every single time I mispronounced something. I even went to him for help, and I tried my best, guys. So, hey, listen, you do what you do.
Hey, man, I mean, I secretly recorded some laughter that I recorded over your videos. No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
It is what it is.
Nah, it's been a good week. Chase is a good guy, and it's been really enjoyable. So, yes, we have seen, again, an average of 12 movies. It was an okay festival overall. I guess to just get into the overall quality, to tease people about what they're going to hear about. There were a couple of really good movies here. There was only one bad one that I saw, and Chase didn't see that one, so he was spared. We'll get into why that is a little bit later on. There's a big surprise in the midst of all this, but yeah, I mean, and then we also saw a movie that I'm reviewing on my website tomorrow. We saw a couple of things, so we'll get to all that. Now, the first day, I guess I'll just do it the first day that I got here. We went to see Hellboy, and that was pretty much
fun stuff.
Yeah, the only thing. And of course, y'all have heard our reviews of that on last week's podcast. And then we recorded that. We watched some stuff. I had been in the home stretch of a Boy Meets World marathon kind of over the past few weeks, and finished that while I was here. So that was cool. We watched a lot of that, some Siskel and Ebert stuff on YouTube, of course, because film critics got to watch it.
Well, we also saw a movie that night.
Right, yeah. We recorded and then we went and saw Missing Link that evening. Really good movie. We probably should have reviewed that in hindsight.
We felt really bad afterwards because we're like, yeah, that should have been the main review this week and not the Lionsgate turd that was that graced us. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of my favorite movies of the year so far. It's fantastic. Leica killed it again. It's probably my second favorite of theirs. I think it's their best since their original Coraline.
Yeah, we talked about it. It's definitely on both of our lists. Second favorite. Like you're still with Coraline as first, right?
Yeah.
I think you and I both agree with that. And then our list kind of differentiate from there. But yeah, we both agree. It's the funniest one.
It's the funniest one
they've ever done.
Yeah,
and it saddens me it flopped at the box office.
And it's also genuinely exciting. There's some threat there. Yeah. Really good movie. So that was our second day. Not much happened, obviously, in the first couple days. We were just kind of easing in. But on my third day here is when our first day of the festival was. Our first movie that we saw was Her Smell. Now, this one comes from writer-director Alex Ross Perry. He is the guy who made stuff like Listen Up, Philip and Queen of Earth, Golden Exits. I've seen all of those. He also directed a movie called The Color Wheel. That was his debut. I haven't seen that. It's kind of hard to find it. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's on iTunes. Last time I looked, it wasn't. I really want to see that. But this one stars Elizabeth Moss as Becky something. Now, of course, that is a stage name. She is the lead guitarist and vocalist of a girl group called Something She. And she's going through a pretty tough time right now. She seems to be in the throes of addiction. She seems to be just generally a misanthrope. And the story of this movie, there's not much of one. It's very stagey. It's a sort of a theatrical 5-act structure where we get different points in they're recording an EP. I think it's their first album in a long time or something. They've been around for 10 years, but they only had been active for a couple of those. And now they're coming back. They're recording an EP, and the movie is about kind of her essentially kind of losing her mind a little bit. Not for any sort of supernatural reasons, although she thinks it is. It's interesting. The character is very superstitious, and she has this spiritual mystic who exorcises her with quotations around the word. And meanwhile, they're having to reckon with a new music scene because there's this other girl group that's coming in. The members are played by Cara Delevingne,
Ashley
Benson, and then I forgot the name of the third one, but anyway, so basically, she decides to invite them to record their next album, and anyway, it just kind of all snowballs into her realizing that she needs help. But it takes a while to get there. I should note that the other band members of hers are played by Agnes Dane and an absolutely heartbreaking Gail Rankin, who plays Allie, this person who is just about this close to being fed up with the lead, with her
but she
main
still
bandmate.
can't shake her off because she's
part of the exactly. There's a breaking point for her at some point in the story. It's a great performance, but of course the star of the movie is Moss, and her performance here is fantastic. She's able to really embrace the kind of almost psychosis of this character in a way that doesn't completely go over the top. It's a very loud, ostentatious performance.
It's very aggressive.
Very aggressive. And so is the filmmaking style. I'm going to get to that in a second. But the first thing, obviously, that needs to be mentioned about this movie is her performance. And her performance is fantastic. It's one of the best lead performances of the year, bar none. As for the movie, and I think that you'll find that Chase and I are in agreement on this, the movie is pretty exhausting. For the first 3 segments, really kind of 2.5, because the first segment's the introduction to everybody. Then it gets into a little bit longer segments. But for the first 2/3 of the movie, or 3/5, I guess, 3/5 of the movie, it keeps this pace of constant tension without any sort of break. And I think that I think that it's ultimately unable to sustain that kind of energy. So, but ironically enough, when it breaks that, we get the best segment. She has gone out to a house in the middle of nowhere, essentially, to kind of start the process of recovery. And by the time we catch up with her, then it's been a while. So that's the best segment of the movie,
and that's where it should have ended. Honestly,
that's where it should have ended. There's a shot where, and it would have been about like, yes, exactly. Chase is doing pantomimes here. So there's a shot of her exiting that house, and I think that would have been the perfect shot to end it. However, the thing that ultimately for me killed it was the fact that it then goes on and it brings us back to the studio. Essentially, all of the movie up until that point had been in the studio, in the recording booth, in the hallways around it, in the break room, all of that, or whatever it's called, the conference room. And I think that when they go back to the studio, for reasons I won't really reveal, I think that it crumples. I think that it just kind of it stops short of that. By feeling like it needs to continue, it's literalizing things that essentially it was just saying in the previous segment. That segment at the house, which is so calm, and then whenever they get back to the studio, it's almost like a middle ground in terms of the pacing. You have the unstoppable pacing of those first few segments, then the quiet of that fourth one. And then whenever they get back to the studio, it's almost like a middle ground. And I don't think that it was necessary. I think that it killed the movie for me. So, I feel like probably Chase won't have – I don't know if he'll have much to say after that, but it's a C+ for me. And that was one of my most anticipated, and it was a bit of a letdown, unfortunately. So, just happens, I guess. Perry's work is notoriously prickly. He deals with hard to deal with characters. I mean, sometimes for different reasons. Golden Exits was kind of an exception to that. That was his movie last year with Emily Brown and Chloe Sevigny, several other people. I can't remember the whole cast. He works with a lot of people, and he does so in this movie too. Golden Exits was an exception. It's my least favorite of his movies, probably because of that. I think that it didn't have any of the interest. But Queen of Earth, obviously, absolutely about a psychotic episode.
It's very isolated.
Very isolated.
It's really kind of weird because they're parallel to Her Smell.
Yeah,
except Her Smell just has more supporting characters around it.
Right. Yeah, there's Queen of Earth isolates its main character in a way that this one doesn't. She's constantly surrounded by people.
But she's isolating herself, though.
Right, she's isolating herself, and it actually might be a problem that she's surrounded by so many people that are enabling her in some ways and all that. And the supporting cast here is really good. I mean, beyond the bandmates of both bands, you had Dan Stevens as her, I don't know if he's husband, ex-husband,
baby
father,
daddy.
Father of her child.
Virginia Madsen
as her mother. That was a really cool thing to see that. There were some other people, but in any case, it was a deep cast. I think it's a missed opportunity, though, and I really want him to get back to what I think is, barring the color wheel, unless that one wows me, his best movie is Queen of Earth for me. I think that I really want him to get back into that mode. I think that he's with these last two movies. I think he's complicated his stories a little too much, complicated his characters a little too much, given a little too much leeway to himself as a writer. It had been 3 years between Queen of Earth and Golden Exits. I think that maybe he was using that time to write Christopher Robin, for instance, because he was one of the screenwriters on that. He wrote Nostalgia last year, a movie with Nick Offerman and Ellen Burstyn and some other people. So he was clearly doing writing projects, but I think that he needed to spend a little bit more time on the screenplays for this and Golden Exits to kind of hone the storytelling. So C+ for me. I'll let Chase talk now.
I mean, you pretty much nailed everything on the head. The only thing I would just add is that, because this boils down to story and length for both of us, but the sound design and the cinematography were fantastic. It reminded me of a dirtier, grungier version of Birdman, and how it was this controlled chaos, sweeping in and out of tight hallways or concert scenes. The house, it was all very compact and very engrossing the way it was shot. it's just more, down to length and story. And then the sound design was this kind of assault on the ears. It was very how would you describe it? It's just it's disorienting.
Disorienting, yeah, fractured kind
right.
of, yeah.
It does enhance the experience of Elizabeth Moss freaking out and stuff. But so once again, it boils down to the length. If they would have eliminated that fifth chunk and probably the second chunk, it would have been a tight hour 40. Yeah. I think that would have been perfect for this.
Yeah, and I think it would have been a solid B plus arena. Yeah. It absolutely would have been. I mean, the performances and general filmmaking are good enough. And it's a good comparison to Birdman because they're both about these really like tightly wound characters creating a piece of art with other people that they can't seem to deal with.
Right.
Obviously, this doesn't have the fake long take
right.
aspect. But it does have some extended takes, though.
Yes.
When it finally quiets down, some of the filmmaking in the last bit. I mean, especially when it gets to the house, there's a lot of still shots of Elizabeth Moss's character or other characters that come in,
and that's the whole point for that specific act of the movie.
Exactly, yeah. It's much more patient. A lot of stillness, like literally just sometimes it's a shot of her sitting, not even moving, just. Yeah,
you quietly understand the character, and like there's a prolonging of the sequence of where she's on the piano with her daughter. It's great stuff because you realize in the moment like she's good at what she does. She just got a hold. These demons got a hold of her, and it was very sad to witness her crumble like that.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so our second movie. This review is my part of the review is going to be a little bit different looking than the rest because I think that there's specific parts of the story that have to do with how the movie works. So just bear with me here. This is a little bit obviously it's not scripted at all, but even relative to that, I'm going off a little bit unscripted here. So this one is called Nonfiction, and it comes from director Olivier Assayas. This one follows a couple of two couples basically and their infidelities, and it also is set within the publishing world of today. Except that. Basically, there's two kind of warring factions in the story here. One is the infidelities; those are less interesting. I'm going to get to those in a little bit. They're less interesting than this overarching kind of story about the publishing world. Basically, Guillaume Canet and Vincent Macaigne play a pair of an editor and a writer who work with a publishing company that have to kind of deal with the fact that books in print are going away. People are kind of veering more toward ebooks and blogs and all of this internet-based stuff that they just haven't really reckoned with. Canet's character is a little bit more inviting of that world, but Macaigne's character is not. And so that's a really interesting thing because it's a movie that very much exists in the now, and I really admired that. This movie is sort of about how these, and they're very stubborn men at the end of the day, how these stubborn men have to keep with the times of today. They again, one of them's a little more willing to do that, the other one isn't. He's very stubborn, and meanwhile, they're both cheating on their wives. And Canet's wife is played by Juliette Binoche. She is an actress that is the star of a long-running cop drama on television. She's growing
as a crisis management.
Yes,
expert.
As a crisis management expert. It's a running joke. And she's growing bored of that role. She wants to do something else. She doesn't think is very complex, although the show has a lot of fans. And then Macaigne's wife is a lawyer or some sort of mediator negotiating a labor dispute about it seems to be kind of far away. She seems to be gone all day. She has a long drive there and back, and it's a long process. So that takes up a lot of her time. That because of that, she's got to be on her phone and have her phones charged at all times. It's actually another running joke. She's either unplugging or plugging in her phones almost in the entire movie. Anyway, so it's an interesting dynamic here because the Macaigne character is cheating with the Binoche character, who again is the wife of the Kane character. So there's an interesting dynamic there. They've been cheating with each other for a long time. I think that they said about 6 years, something like that. And
these aren't just like random couples. They've been friends for what seems like decades.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Kane's character is cheating with a digital translator for his company. She's much younger, and so again, you have kind of an interesting dynamic here between all these couples and the truths that come out. Some people are not surprised to find out certain things. Some people are pretty shocked. The inciting incident of the plot is the fact that McConaughey's character is publishing a book in which he's going to be in which basically he's the author of I think, what did he call it? Auto fiction, essentially semi-autobiographical fiction. He changes names. He doesn't quite base the characters on the real ones. There's enough of a difference between them, but you can also tell who they are if you're in the know of his life. So in this particular case, he's kind of there was a sexual act done during the 7th installment of a huge sci-fi series, and he has pinned that act on a major television star that he happened to have a fling with. And that is true. He did have a fling with her, but it wasn't her. And that's basically sort of at the center of the drama here. It's a very small thing. Assayas usually works at a small level unless he's making something huge like Carlos, the 5-hour Carlos the Jackal movie that he did. Usually he works in very small dramas, and this is definitely one of those. It's but I think it's sharp. I think it's really funny in a very dry French kind of way. It's extremely French, and I'm not a super big like authority on Assayas. I don't know if this would be a good place to start with his movies. I suspect not, but probably the most accessible entryway into his kind of filmmaking, which is again very much of a tone manager. He works with actors really well, specifically Binoche. She's really good here. He works with her a lot, and yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. It's not one to feel super strong about. It doesn't elicit a super strong, reaction. But I liked it. So solid B for me.
Well, and also it has when we left the screening, one of your favorite meta jokes of the year so far.
Yes, and I won't give it up. But let's just say, and this seriously is not giving anything away. Chase can tell you this. He can probably acknowledge this after I say it. Let's just say that Juliette Binoche, the actress, also exists in this universe. So the real actress. So yeah, they mine some great humor out of that, and it's unexpected in unexpected ways too.
It was definitely the best joke in the entire movie.
Oh yeah, it's so funny. Everybody in the audience loved that.
Right.
It went over really well. I have a feeling that it's going to go over pretty well. I think it opens in limited release on May 3rd, and then it expands. I think it'll be expanding by the end of the month, by the end of May. So if you're a fan of Assayas, if you're a fan of these actors, and I should mention Nora Hamzawi plays the lawyer, and Krista Tourette plays the digital translator. All really solid work. But particularly Binoche, and I thought Kane was really good too. So yeah, solid movie. I gave it a B. So
yeah, I mean, I agree. It's a solid little film. A couple things I really appreciate about it: the cinematography.
Yeah.
It has this smoky, timeless look to it. It almost looks like an old Woody Allen film from like the 70s.
Yeah. It's definitely borrowing that aesthetic. Yeah,
yeah, definitely shot on film, so it has that film grain. It has that timeless texture to it. But yeah, it's a nice little film. I think the relationships and the characters are what we go to see this for. This isn't like a loud movie. It's like you said, it's very quiet. Extremely different from Personal Shopper.
Right.
Extremely different.
Yeah, he made a big jump here.
Right.
And you're so right about the cinematography. The cinematographer here is a guy named Yorick Lasso. He shot I Am Love for Luca Guadagnino.
Oh, okay.
Which was beautiful. I'm not a huge fan of the movie, but undeniably beautiful. He's shooting Little Women for Greta Gerwig this year, which I'm obviously excited for that, and I'm excited to see his work on this. It's really good work, and he knows how to shoot actors. Close-ups, medium shots. There's very few long shots here, but he utilizes his camera really well, and that's why I really enjoyed this kind of. It almost reminds me sort of Tim Orr's work with David Gordon Green. A lot of his quieter dramas that. Or comedies even. I think he shoots everything that Green's made, and it's very quiet. You're not going there to see The Revenant,
No.
It's not beautiful portraits. It's just
Well, and I found that to be quite shocking when a lot of people, because Joel and I, we do reviews for this lady. She posts in the Facebook group and stuff. And so I read people's comments on whatever Joel and I post just to see what they kind of think. A lot of people found this movie to be boring.
Yeah, and it does kind of rest on that sort of the pace and the tone of something that I guess I could see it. If you aren't into these character dynamics, then the filmmaking probably isn't going to do much for you,
right?
Because you're going to check out and you're not really going to notice anything. For me, I was right in.
And they're very, even though these people are committing adultery, they're still likable people. You still want to kind of follow them in their relationship with one another, because I have plenty of high school friends that I'm still friends with, and friends with their wives and girlfriends and whatnot, and it's kind of the dynamic we have, where like we just get together and pick up on conversations we left off last week. So I found that that friendship and the relationships between everyone, even though they were committing some questionable things, I still found it to be enjoyable to watch them interact, and that's what you go to this movie for. It's not anything you go like, oh my god, that cinematography was just so great, or this was such a Oscar winning movie. It's like, this is character based. It's not based in aesthetics or style, but again, I mean, it's all about whether or not a director and a cinematographer know how to use their cameras that they're working with, or camera, right? Whatever. I don't know if there are multiple cameras on this, but in any case, it's good, and I think that people will get some pleasure out of the character dynamics, hopefully. So that was the second movie. The third movie is called Sorry Angel. This one comes from director Christophe Honoré. Pierre Deladonchamp stars as Jacques, who is a writer. He hasn't written something in a while, but he does have some renown within his community, and he's also a gay man living in early 1990s France, right at the tail end of the biggest part of the AIDS crisis. And first things first, I love how this movie very distinctively sets it in a time period. We see a poster for The Piano from 1993. We see a poster for the performance that, who was it? Did as Orlando. I've forgotten who played Orlando. There was a performance by an actress who played Orlando in a stage version from 1992 to 1995. I've forgotten who it was, but in any case, we see that. I like how the costumes are very 90s. It's very 90s style, particularly for France in that period of time. And the story here there's not really much of a linear story. It's more just about the relationship. Yeah, it's basically Jacques meets a young man played by Vincent Lacoste, and this kid that he meets seems to be rather closeted in his bisexuality. He lives with a woman. They clearly love each other. This is not a movie to spell out things, obviously, for people. So, if I'm wrong in some of my facts, fine. But basically, because it's extremely like in the moment, it doesn't offer any sort of background information. There are no flashbacks. There's nothing like that. It's very much in the moment. It follows this relationship as kind of it navigates the distance between the two, because they don't live by each other. He lives in Brittany. And Jacques lives in Paris, and they basically meet for liaisons. But the movie is equally as about this relationship as it is about kind of their processing all of the changes in their lives. Jacques' ex-boyfriend has AIDS, and so a lot of that background with him and the ex-boyfriend is very touching, very affecting, ultimately tragic. And meanwhile, the younger man, and I apologize, I've completely forgotten his character's name, but Lacoste's character is kind of struggling with his own feelings, and one night, he goes to a movie. I don't know what the movie is, but it looked remarkably like something from Les Miserables. I'm not entirely sure. If it is, then it's a version of Les Miserables that I want to see.
I'm not entirely sure that was what it was. But in any case, they meet at a movie, and they communicate, through letters and phone calls occasionally. It moves a lot like, in some ways, some of the third act of Call Me by Your Name when they're separated and they have to kind of rely on phone calls. And so it lives in that space. It's not nearly as beautiful or as effective as Call Me by Your Name. I think it's a little meandering. It's a little too long. It's about as long as Her Smell was, which is 2 hours and 15 minutes. I think that it could have used a little bit of a screw tightening in terms of not the plot, because again, it's really just kind of a series of liaisons, and we get to know some of the supporting characters, like Jacques' roommate Matthew. I've forgotten who plays him, but in any case, really likable characters. You like these guys, and you want to see them together. Of course, they have this gigantic elephant in the room, especially when Jacques' health starts to fail, and that takes us into the third act. So it's it's really well made. It's kind of slight to me. It struck me as rather slight in terms of any sort of staying power. That's why, for instance, I don't remember some of the developments here. It was our third movie. It was at 8:00, and Chase was drifting. Not to, out him or anything, but
it's true.
He drifted into dozing basically a few times. I don't think he missed anything though. There was I think a phone call that he fell asleep during. I'm not sure how much of that he got, but other than that, I think it was only for like 10 seconds or something. Right. It wasn't bad, So in any case, B- for me. I think that it's solid. I maybe even a B, something in that arena. 3 stars on my website. I'm going to be reviewing this one tomorrow as well, as of this recording. So I liked it, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to Chase.
Yeah, I agree. As you can tell, besides maybe like one or two of them, we're going to be agreeing on a lot of these. But Starry Angel, very good romance film. It lies on the shoulders of those two actors. If those two guys didn't sell it, this movie would have been a boring,
really good,
very boring movie.
Yeah.
But they kept the movie going. I really enjoyed the discovering of sexuality in this film, the dangers of AIDS, and even the risks that these guys were willing to take just to fall in love. Like, that's kind of powerful stuff. As Joel mentioned, the first guy, he's bisexual, and he was fighting with that. And they don't really explore that too deeply,
right,
but once he meets,
essentially the drama of his bisexuality lies in the woman that he lives with, who
it's also about the time period. A lot of people that are bisexual or gay, it's very hard for them to come out to other people, and so they have to kind of closet their lives like that. And there was something kind of freeing when he met the other guy, and when he went down to that alleyway to
once he makes that realization, all that, it's really
touching stuff. So, and then towards the end, like you and I both knew what was going to happen, but it was still impactful. And I think as a romance film, it's solid. This is the problem with seeing this many movies in a row. If it has staying power, we'll remember it. If not, it will kind of fall by the wayside. But I'll still give it a B.
Yeah, it's pretty solid stuff. So it's been around for a while. The film opened in limited release back in February. It's been expanding since then. They picked it up because the guy who picked it for the festival watched it on a plane. I can't remember where he was going, but it was already on the plane. Mm-hmm. So that's when he kind of made the movements to bring it here. So it's been around a while. It might not be, if it made it to your area, it might be gone already because it's been 2 months. That's generally speaking, for movies like this, they only stay a few weeks at an art house.
Right. So if you guys love films, check it out.
Exactly.
And it's definitely a super French film. I noticed this in this one in Nonfiction. Almost every single scene, someone was drinking wine or smoking. It is literally the most French thing ever. It's so great.
It's pretty amazing how French. All right, so that was the end of the first day, and that brings us into our second day. Now, our first movie, our only movie together this day was one called A Fortunate Man. Now, this one comes from director Bill August. I think I said that right. I'm not sure. His first name is Bille. I'm not sure if there's a different pronunciation. I apologize to anybody who heard that. But That's what I'm going with, Bill August. Now, this one is the story of basically a guy who... Hold on one second.
His father's a clergyman, and he's expected to become a clergyman, and yet he wants to take a different path in life and become an engineer. And he goes to engineering school.
Yes, so whenever he goes to engineering school, it's basically he kind of fails at his task. He wants to create a series of dams that help the economy and the ecosystem.
Converting to wind and solar power.
Yeah, exactly. And so, meanwhile, he seeks help from a wealthy socialite, a guy named Ivan.
We should also mention that this is set in the 20s, correct?
I think
the 30s.
I think it's the 1890s.
Or 1890s.
I think it's the 1890s.
Because that makes a huge difference. Because if people are listening to us, are like, oh, this is set in modern time. No. This is set in a time period where if you thought people were stubborn about switching energy sources now... even back then, it was even worse.
Oh,
you'd be burned at the stake for bringing this up.
Yeah, exactly. And so, basically, he meets a socialite. He's trying to get help, and he's played by his name is Peter Andreas. Now, again, guys, a lot of movies. This one kind of escaped my memory. It was a big day for me. For all of us, but it was just a day, another day for me of 3 movies. So bear with me on this. But in any case, Peter Andreas goes by Per eventually, and he's played by Esben Smed. Yes, so he wants to be an engineer. He comes from a really oppressively Christian background, fundamentalist family who believe that his turn toward science is a turn towards sin, and they basically his father casts him out. Whenever he meets Ivan, this socialite who's I think the oldest son of a family, the Salomons, who have 2 sons, 2 daughters, and this guy's the older son. And then there are 2 daughters. The younger one seems taken with Per whenever they meet, and when Per attends a party to try to get some funding, and but his eye is caught by the older daughter, whose name is not immediately available.
Thank you, IMDb.
Yes, they list the cast in a really strange way because again, I'm having to rely on memory and it's bad. I know. Jacobi. So. Jacobi?
Jacobi's the character's name, yes.
Yeah, Jacobi played by Katrine Grice Rosenthal. I'm giving that a shot. So I'm really bad with Eastern European names. Anyway, this all takes place in Denmark, and so there's obviously some things about the culture and history of Denmark that I didn't get a little bit out of remove. But this is sort of an old-fashioned romance, something from the 90s or 80s. In terms of scope and the visual aesthetic is beautiful, beautifully shot film. Some of the best cinematography of the year, honestly, and there's some really good cinematography at this festival.
It's almost 3 hours long.
It's almost 3 hours
sweeping,
long.
Epic type of film.
So it works for a long time as kind of this study both of their romance, which plays out fairly typically, particularly when some character turns are made. So there's that, but there's also a study of kind of progressivism in a society that does not allow that, and to that end, it's pretty effective, particularly because Smed is good as Per, and really kind of a grounded performance. I also like Grice Rosenthal, who is really very sweet. I don't know if there's a whole lot of other actors worth really specifically talking about, but it's solid work all around, So, beautiful film. It justifies its length in terms of, it's 162 minutes. It justifies its length because it's telling a sprawling story that takes place over several years. A lot of years, actually. Many, many years. Now, there's one big asterisk.
Oh, man, I'm ready to jump in. I'm ready to do it.
Chase visibly looked over at me with the most betrayed expression I've ever seen from him, and
because we spent so much time going into it with his story, and then when the pivot happens, I was appalled.
There's a pivot in the character of Purr that I think we're missing the heart of. It feels like at one point there's a shift in time forward by several years, and it's at the end here. In many ways, and this is a better movie with a better handling of this ending, but in many ways, in terms of the fact that it jumps forward and it features such a shift, it reminded me of the shift forward in There Will Be Blood, where you move from the mid like 1910s all the way to the late 1920s. Here, I don't know what the years are in particular, but you have this shift in a characteristic of the movie to and in the characters, and it's incredibly jarring because of sorry guys.
Yeah. Sorry, the lady of the household fostered a dog, so we have a new dog in the house, so I apologize for the barking. We did fine for 40 minutes, but
yes.
I'm trying to calm him down, but
in any case, this story basically takes a gigantic shift toward some pretty amazing melodrama, and I think that it's very uncharacteristic. It really affects the movie in terms of its kind of effectiveness going into this home stretch. It doesn't affect performances or anything like that, but it just the energy of the movie
unearned.
just kind of.
It's unearned.
Yeah, it's unearned. Yes,
because
exactly.
they don't.
It's really jarring.
Yeah, they don't work up to that moment, and that's kind of the problem. Is that I think you were correct. I think the director lost something in translation with because it's based on a book, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
It's based on a
so
novel.
I think there was a little bit of kind of translation that was a bit muddy in transitioning, because I got the overall message that they were trying to go for. Like sometimes. The environment that you grow up in can affect future children in the future. I get that, but it doesn't work up to that point, and it's really jarring when you have this commitment to this character and this relationship and his career, and he throws it all away because of his upbringing, which was not laid out in the previous 2 hours and 15 minutes of the movie. And so the last 20, 30 minutes, I'm sitting there going, this whole ending bit was undeserved, and you're forcing me to accept this, and I'm not. And so it's really frustrating, because 75% of the movie is amazing, and I was convinced. I sat there, I told you, I was convinced that this was going to be the best thing we see at the festival. But my God, it derails into something that I'm very baffled that when you watch it on first viewing, that no one pointed out and went, don't you think this is a little jarring? I mean, there's one point, and you guys don't even know the context of this. Everything's going fine, right? And then one of his family members dies. So he goes back to his hometown. He meets up with another woman in her family. He beelines towards this woman with Michael Myers type of music.
And
he starts
really weird.
Yeah, he starts trying to, woo her, if you will, and she's like, "No, I don't want to." And then the next scene cuts. I guess they're together now with children. It's like, what happened? So that's what we're kind of getting. I don't want to ruin it if people do want to watch it. Because if you're fans of films like The English Patient or like sprawling romantic epics, I would still say give it a shot, because maybe the pivot will work for some people. But that is what ultimately fell apart for you and I.
Yeah, and it's soft B-, I guess.
Right.
Something like that. Yeah, it's pretty good ultimately. And I should tell people, like, Chase was worried that he would fall asleep.
I know, it was the one film I actually was attentive for the entire thing. Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised.
Yeah.
For a 3-hour long movie that we started at 10 a.m., by the way.
Yeah,
It
it's
was
crazy.
an early movie.
Especially considering we got back kind of late, and
Right.
had to sleep and wake up. It was interesting. So,
But this is not the most
and a slightly
interesting part.
longer drive because this
Right.
one was at a different theater than the other three, than the first three.
But see,
And
guys, this is where I'm going to get excited because I was not here for the next two films that Joel's about to talk about because I was off doing my own thing. And we'll get to that in just a second. But now I want to actually hear Joel talk about these two movies I was absent for because he's told me a little bit about them, and one of them is the worst thing he saw at the festival. So I'm so excited. So what was your Sunday journey like after A Fortunate Man?
Okay, so it was back to the first theater for me, and my second movie was called Leave the Bus Through the Broken Window. Now, this is a documentary from director Andrew Havia, who was one of the executive producers on Moonlight, interestingly enough. I'm not sure how that came about, but in any case, this is a documentary about his trip to Hong Kong in order to basically study art, the Hong Kong art scene, and it didn't really work out very well because of the fact that he went there on a whim. He did not prepare any sort of thing. He didn't learn about the history or the culture or anything like that. He didn't know the language, and nothing was subtitled, essentially, or translated for him in terms of menus at restaurants, all that. So he goes around. He basically tries to just kind of take in all this culture, meet some artists, and so forth. And basically, the documentary is a curious one for many reasons. It breaks some of the rules of traditional documentary filmmaking. There's no talking heads in this. It's all first person, actually, in terms of literally everybody's interacting with him, so everybody's kind of interacting with you. Because they're looking at the camera. You only hear Havia's voice once in the background, and that is because, though there is narration, he has plugged all of that narration that he wrote into a dictation device, so that the narration that you're listening to comes from a robot. And it turns out to work better than it sounds a little bit, especially because he kind of turns it into something of a joke. He gives the voice curse words to speak, which is very jarring to hear a robot voice say the F word at one point.
But we all did that as kids, typing into the translators on the computer, like,
right.
What in the F is this?
Right, and so so that's pretty funny. I think that he's got a lot of very interesting ideas, particularly about these cultural differences, even though he's not able to really explore them because he doesn't know the culture. It's very much about a person completely out of his depth. So there are interesting ideas here. I think that what happened, though, this movie is basically an hour without the credits on either side. And
is it really that short? Because I remember you were telling me it was short, but even minus the credits,
it's 68 minutes in full.
Are you?
Yeah.
What the?
So, and I think that because of the short length, he's not able to go into a lot of this in any particularly insightful way. Now, it certainly has perspective. That's not what it's suffering from.
Is it one of those kind of ordeals where it's a great concept to go into and it's great for the first 10-15 minutes, but it loses steam because it's not fully realized?
Well, I think actually its best parts are in the middle. It gets off to a bit of a rough start because it starts at the end of the story and then it backs up, which is another kind of broken rule because not a lot of documentaries, I think, at least I found, do that. Sometimes they're out of order. We saw Three Identical Strangers, which is kind of telling last year, which is kind of telling the story slightly out of order. It's flashing forward and backward. This one has a single point where it's flashed forward and then it flashes backward, and that's the whole movie after that point. And ultimately, though, it's basically sort of a thesis statement without even the first paragraph of an essay, because he comes to the end of the movie and he hasn't really made any other point other than the fact that he was unprepared for this and that it didn't go well. So basically, it makes this story about another culture all about him. Now, it's slightly better than I'm making it sound just because of the fact that the technique kind of elevates itself beyond the fact that he's using a digital home video camera for this.
I also like the perspective that you brought up of there's not any subtitles. You kind of see it from a first-person point of view because it puts you as an audience member in that situation, and it kind of makes you enjoy the journey a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And it's So it's interesting. It's just not entirely successful.
Right.
So this one, C+, is probably the closest a movie came to me genuinely getting behind it without quite being able to. It's a closer to a recommendation than Her Smell, which is the other kind of major kind of C+-ish movie that I saw. And so, anyway, it's interesting, but it isn't quite successful. Now, the other movie...
Oh, boy, here we go. I can't wait.
...is not successful at
all.
all.
Man.
This one is Ophelia, and it comes from... It's been around for a while. It debuted at last year's Sundance, and it's been struggling to find any sort of distribution since then. It didn't obviously
Which
didn't
is
play,
not a good sign, by the way.
Not a good sign. And it's honestly, I don't know how much it deserves it. This one comes... I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to tear into this movie a little bit. So this one comes from director Claire McCarthy, screenwriters Simi Chalice and Lisa Klein, and it is basically purports to be a retelling of William Shakespeare's Hamlet from the point of view of Ophelia. Now, if people aren't familiar with Hamlet for some reason, Ophelia is the love interest, and ultimately her fate is kind of put in question because she goes off stage and never really comes back. Her death is reported at the end of Hamlet, and we don't actually get the story there. And it's because Shakespeare is not a fan of women characters in his plays. Anyway, so this one basically is trying to reclaim some of that by telling the story from her perspective, which means, of course, that it has to essentially make up entire parts of the story from cloth. So we get characters here that do not show up in the original play. There is a witch character in this town, never in the original play, especially because, and it's I guess theoretically interesting where they take the character because she's kind of a dark reflection of the Queen, Gertrude here, right, played by Naomi Watts. Do the math. Anyway, so
man, they got Naomi Watts and like Daisy Ridley to be in this.
Yeah,
that's
crazy. Naomi Watts, Daisy Ridley plays Ophelia. She's pretty good. She's the best thing about this movie. Not even some of the other actors really work very well at all. You have Clive Owen as Claudius.
Clive Owen?
Yeah, Clive Owen.
What movie did you watch?
Yeah, Clive Owen as Claudius. He is, of course, the one that's sleeping with the Queen right as her husband dies, the king. And you also have Tom Felton as Laertes, who is Ophelia's brother. And I forget who plays Polonius, but it's not a name actor. He's okay. In any case, of course, part of the story here is that Hamlet goes off to war, comes back, and has been kind of engaging in this power dynamic with Laertes from childhood, really, and he's going to be the heir of the throne, and his father dies by snake bite, maybe. And so, in any case, Polonius is killed in a tragic accident because Hamlet thinks he's somebody else, and that's kind of the core of this story. And it goes on from there. And basically, the problem with this movie, two major things, and they completely killed any sort of intrigue I might have had in this retelling of the story. It's not even a retelling. Basically, it adds some characters, slightly changes some story facts, and then follows Ophelia through the point the point in the Hamlet story which we don't see her. So that's, of course, at the end we learn what happened with quotes around it to her, even though in the original play it doesn't actually matter because we don't ever see it.
So what's the point of doing this perspective then?
Essentially, it's just another telling of the Hamlet story.
Right.
But it just so happens that Ophelia is the title character and is kind of the protagonist, except that Hamlet features just as much in the story as he does in his original one.
Right.
There's never any point looking back through the original story. There's never any point where we saw Hamlet in the original play that we don't see him here. So except I guess maybe some of his time at war, but I can't remember how deep they go into that in the play. So it's a long one. In any case, it's also bad because of the aesthetic choices on McCarthy's part, and the it basically looks like an advanced kind of theater production that they kind of based in like in a set or whatever.
Right.
But very basic, effective costuming and production design, but unfortunately, the cinematography is all blunt lighting, and it doesn't have any sort of visual scope. So and then because of the fact that a lot of the melodrama is really like heavy, YA adaptation kind of stuff, it's really overwrought. But it's also it's literally, I mean, I hate using this phrase because I've used it so many times in my life. It's become something I lean on. But I'm just going to use it one more time. Overwrought and undercooked in terms of the dramatics, undercooked in terms of the visual scope. So it just fell flat for me repeatedly. There's a lot of overuse of slow motion photography. Relying on that can be kind of a killer if you're not like Zack Snyder or somebody. And you're not trying to take a more interesting approach, like in computers, honestly. I think that computer effects are the things that work best for slow motion photography. But in any case, there's one effective scene, and it's when everything kind of comes to a head at the end. But they also changed the entire dynamic of the final battle scene with quotes around it. There's no war in this movie, but there's a scene where essentially everybody kind of meets their fate, and it's effective for what it is, but it also changes everything about the ending of the original story. So we get different fates for different characters, and different people have like climaxes that they don't earn, and resolutions that they don't earn, and all of that. It just falls flat repeatedly. I don't know how popular this is. I haven't really looked it up in terms of its reviews from last year. But I know at least of one person that I attended the screening with, and she was pretty much in the same boat as me in terms of how really kind of poor this movie is. Yeah, it's just not good. D+ for this one. And it's the worst thing that I saw, so spoiler alert, I guess. Worst thing I saw at the film festival. It was overall solid, but this was definitely a struggle to get through.
Joel, where was I at? Where was I at to enjoy this wonderful experience of Ophelia?
Oh boy, well, you tell the story, sir.
Oh, okay. I guess if I tell it from my viewpoint, it'll matter. So I did not attend the documentary or Ophelia. When Joel called me, what was it, like 3 weeks ago? He's like, "This is what we're doing Sunday. We're doing this one, this one, this one." I was like, I need to scratch off the last two. So he's like, well, "Why?" And you have to keep in mind, I was at my girlfriend's parents' house at the time. I had to use code words. So I was like, "Joel, it is happening that night." And it took him about like 20 seconds, and he went, "Oh." So and he's like, "Okay, you can do the first movie and go back home." And so what I did on Sunday night, I went to my girlfriend's parents' house, and we watched the premiere season episode of Game of Thrones, season 8, episode 1. And the episode was overall fine. But the best part was doing the proposal at the end. That is right. I'm officially engaged. So if you've been listening to this podcast for 5 years, I have made a life advancement that I figured you guys should know about. So that is what I did Sunday night. So this festival overall was just kind of bland movie-wise, but we'll always remember it because it changed my life. So that is what I did. I proposed, and now I'm engaged. I'm a fiancé, Joel. How do you feel about it? Will you call me fiancé? Mr. Fiancé?
Mr. Fiancé. No, I refuse to call you.
What? Well, that's not how this works. You're supposed to call me Mr. Fiancé. We agreed on that.
Oh boy, I don't remember that agreement. He probably came in and tried to do an osmosis thing when I was sleeping. You will call me Mr. Fiancé. No, but yeah, of course, great stuff. And I was in a movie when it happened, but of course, I feel like I was one of the first people outside the room to find out. And
Joel was the last human I saw before I went to her parents' house.
Yeah.
So I told Joel, I was like, it's going down tonight. And to be honest with you, I was thinking about that the entire time while watching A Fortunate Man. But luckily, for the most part, I was engaged with that movie. But man, I was a wreck. I was a wreck after that first movie. My stomach was acting up. I had to drink like 7 beers just to calm it down. It was bad. And you're probably wondering how I did it. Just briefly, if you watch Game of Thrones, there is a language in that show that's called Dothraki. And I did my best. It is caught on video, and I'm sure purists will be like, that's not how this is pronounced. Okay, cool. I proposed in Dothraki. So I tried my best, but it is what it is.
Well, it's certainly. I think I've heard of like people proposing like Klingon and
right. So it's not unheard of.
It's not unheard of, but it's a clever way of doing that, particularly because the premiere was was there. And to kind of bring us back to the festival, or well, to the week at least, real quick, I just wanted to say to all the Game of Thrones fans out there, this incredible joke. I just wanted to say this incredible joke. Okay, so don't like send me hate mail, or do that might be fun to read on air. No, I'm just
Joe. You don't know anything.
I'm just gonna say that I really hope that Game of Thrones fans enjoyed the premiere with its orcs and hippogriffs and Wookiees and Klingons. I really hope.
You can leave now. So my fiance loves that show. That's why I proposed at that point in time. So if she listens to this, and here's Joel's ignorance, so to speak, she will come here and kick you out herself. So pure ignorance, Joel. Pure ignorance.
There we go. All right, so then Monday was a break. We didn't see any festival movies. We did see a movie,
which I will not review because, as Joel will state, I fell asleep through most of it. I don't feel comfortable reviewing it if I did miss that much, so I will not be even talking about it. Right. So,
well, in any case, this was Sunset. It's the new movie from Laszlo Nemes. I think that's how you say that. I have no idea how to say his name. I've never heard it spoken, but. In any case, he's the director of Son of Saul from a few years ago.
Which, by the way, fantastic film. One of the best of that year. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I would be actually interested to see... Anyway, Sunset I liked. I didn't like it as much as Son of Saul. I don't think it's as sort of tightened in terms of the storytelling. It has a lot of, I think, extraneous kind of supporting characters. I like it, though. I think it's a really fascinating bit of aesthetic kind of trickery because once again, not as much this time, but once again, Nemesh's kind of technique here is following faces really close, a lot of close-ups of faces, particularly the main actress, Julie Jacob.
Following people from behind, just really kind of keeping it close-knit if you don't know what his shooting style is.
Yeah, and it was much more pronounced in Son of Saul, which literally just followed a guy's face or the back of his head.
Which I thought was more powerful because what was happening in the background was obviously out of focus, and mostly it was like executions and stuff. Yeah. And it made it more horrific.
And it was actually so out of focus, I didn't realize this until after the movie, but the main actress was in Son of Saul. We just wouldn't have known that because she was obviously background kind of, or maybe in the opening scene, I think that there was a little bit of, it opened up a little bit. But in any case, this one was effective. I thought that the main performance was terrific. Yes, Chase slept more than he thought he did. We got out of the movie. It's about 44 minutes. Of course, we took a break from the festival to watch a 2.5-hour movie. But anyway.
I think it's really ironic. The one I slept through was not even a festival movie.
Right. Well, I mean, you had no stakes. I mean, I'm sure that I don't know if you can even really quantify your feelings as you were falling asleep, but I'm sure that in the back of your mind you were like, "There's no stakes here. I can kind of drift off." Right. And plus, I mean, we had watched either 4 or 6 movies by this point.
Well, and also you got to keep in mind I was still high on life with the engagement.
I got like 4 hours of sleep.
Yeah, I was sore that morning. Yeah. I had to go to the doctor before. I was wiped out.
Yeah. So it was a big day. Of course, we went to another location of my work. I work at a video store, and we went to a Dallas location of that. We had also gone to the Arlington location. Chase lives in a city called Arlington, and we went to that location. So I saw a couple of locations that I either hadn't seen in a while or at all. So that was pretty fun. But
did you mention that Sunset starred Cara Delevingne? Because she looked exactly... It distracted me the entire time. I was like, she looks exactly like her.
It's Emma Cara Watson Delevingne.
Right.
It's remarkable how similar... Yeah. Basically, she's the two of them put together. I would love to see a movie with them playing sisters. I don't know if Julie Jacob knows English. I'm not going to... assume anything. Maybe she does, but we haven't seen her in an English role, so I don't know. But I would love to see that happen, where they play sisters or something. maybe like a
it is scary
clone,
how alike they
clone
look.
story or something. Yeah, it's a really good performance too. She carries the movie on her back.
You have to when you have 95% of the movie literally following your face.
Yeah.
You have to.
It was good. I'm not going to go into like the plot or anything. Y'all can read my review. I still haven't written it, but I'm going to try to write it before tomorrow morning.
And like I said, I don't even feel comfortable saying I watched it on Letterboxd because if I miss 40 minutes, I miss like a third of it. So I don't feel comfortable doing that.
So anyway, that was our kind of day off. We just kind of chilled. It was.
Did we watch any movies that day? Like here at the house?
I don't think so. We watched a bunch of Boy Meets World. I think that's the day that I finished Boy Meets World.
I think so
too. Was on Monday. It was either that or Tuesday. So speaking of Tuesday, that was the day we watched Clerks.
That was the day we watched Clerks.
Yeah, because we watched. Okay, so. Yeah, we watched Clerks, and that was my first ever viewing of Clerks. Before this point, yes,
rolling my eyes ever so deeply into my skull.
Probably everybody else is too.
Jeez,
I had only seen Cop Out, which barely is even a Kevin Smith movie because he didn't write it.
God. Why was that your first one?
I know, but it's because it was in theaters and I saw it. But and then I had seen Tusk, which I think is really underrated. I know a lot of people,
I love Tusk.
Yeah. It's weird. It's also barely a Kevin Smith movie because it's so unlike his other movies. People, that and kind of Yoga Hosers. I never saw that one, but yeah, it's yeah, and Red State. I never saw Red State either. I need to see that one. But in any case, we watched Clerks. Really, really funny. I'm going to come back to this idea though and these characters in a couple days or a couple of segments. But watch that. Really funny. I can see why now. It was
you understand why now it's iconic?
Yeah, it really is, and it's genuinely iconic too. It really changed things a lot for.
It changed the whole raunchy comedy game in the '90s.
Yeah. At least a segment of it because you had sort of Kevin Smith on this really hard R, comedy. It's
a lot of people don't know this. Clerks was rated NC-17 strictly because of dialogue, and yet they appealed it. Nothing was cut, so what Joel saw was. Technically, in the MPAA's eyes, a NC-17 cut.
Yeah, exactly. And a similar thing happened with the sequel, actually, too.
Right.
So we'll get to the sequel in a couple of segments here.
How would you describe Clerks for people that haven't seen it?
Basically, it's sort of like around that time there was a movement in Europe called Dogma. And it's interesting that he made a movie called Dogma, but I think it's actually maybe Dogme. I don't know. It's Dogme. And it was a movement toward smaller, using kind of low-def cameras, smaller kind of chamber drama settings, single settings, very few characters, but also an ensemble kind of, in a way, with a main character. Lars von Trier was somewhat a part of this, Thomas Vinterberg. I haven't seen a lot of them, but I know about the movement, and I feel like maybe at the same time Kevin Smith was kind of doing a similar thing for indie comedies because it's a very small movie, very, very small.
Yeah,
it's black and white.
Takes course over a day, right? I mean,
it's black and white, and it's not like particularly what is the word I'm looking for? It's not black and white in this like the elegant. That's the word I was looking for. In the elegant tradition of old Hollywood, it's very, very simple. It's almost as if basically he just kind of pressed make black and white or whatever on the camera because he had such a low budget.
It has the saturation and the aggressive attitude black and white of like. Did you ever see Pi? From Aronofsky?
I didn't. I've seen sequences of it. Yeah, and
it looks
very
exactly
similar.
like that.
And it's around the same time, maybe a few years apart.
Right. It's actually really close to each other.
Yeah, really close to each other. But it's fantastic.
Who do you like more, Dante or Randall?
Oh man, performance-wise, interestingly enough, Randall. I mean, they're both great characters to follow.
Right.
For different reasons. I don't think it's useful to compare them, but they're really fun characters. Both of them are.
You and I were talking about it last night, and I don't
think
think
Jeff Anderson's performance as Randall.
It's
is
great.
Really,
it's
something
so great.
special.
And then Brian O'Halloran, I believe that's how you pronounce it.
O'Halloran.
Yeah. O'Halloran. He's great as Dante. And we were discussing this last night. I think a lot of people gloss this over, but Kevin Smith he writes his movies like they're plays. Like it's really interesting. Like he even blocks the actors and the way they say their dialogue back and forth, it feels like a theater play.
Yeah, it's interesting because the way that you watch a play, you watch the action. I don't even know how to describe it. I'm not really well versed in theater, so
Right.
I don't know how to describe the perspective that the audience has visually on the action. I don't know how to describe that. I'm not sure, but that's exactly what it is because you're looking. It's almost constant medium shots.
Yep.
Really, there's some close-ups, but most of the shot setups, the comedy that he mines out of the movie comes from the fact that there are a bunch of medium shot setups.
Right.
And so, you think of pretty much any shot is iconic of them at the counter of the convenience store, of them together or one of them or whatever, and it gets the most out of you looking in every corner of the frame, and you do that with a play. You're looking at everything.
Right.
You're engaging with characters, but you have to keep an eye on everything. And so, he it's very much stage plays, and obviously this and Clerks 2, these are the only ones of his kind of classic filmography, the ones that could be described this way that I've seen. I haven't seen Mallrats. I don't know if that kind of continues that tradition.
Chasing Amy.
Chasing Amy, I haven't seen that. Haven't seen Dogma. I haven't seen Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Haven't seen Jersey Girl, which is kind of minor from him. But
we'll probably hold off on the Smith filmography until he comes over or we meet up the next time, and we'll continue.
Yeah, because I'm really looking forward to seeing. I want to watch Mallrats and then Dogma and then Jay and Silent Bob because I know Jay and Silent Bob kind of ties them all together. And
right.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of cameos in that, and so I wouldn't want to do that until I see, the other ones. I wanted to do Clerks 2 because I wanted to continue with those characters.
Right.
But otherwise, I was kind of fighting. Do I want to go ahead and do Mallrats, or do I want to, do that, or do I want to? Do I want to do?
I appreciate continue on the sequel, and we'll get to it here in a little bit. But listen. Joel is a stickler when it comes to comedies. It is very hard to make this man laugh. The fact that he was cackling while we were watching Clerks 2 made me happy because, I always thought it was a funny movie, but I was really worried that the raunchy kind of and racist and all this type of humor would turn him off, and so I'm glad that he went along with it.
Yeah, it's because it's honest about its characters. Ultimately, if it was about a bunch of idiots, that's why I don't like the Hangover movies because there's so much going on there in terms of really unlikable characters doing stupid things that I can't connect with it. But I was able to connect with this one. I think that they're likable, generally good-natured guys, even if there's
right.
A lot
and
of really
it all goes down to
things
the ending speeches of both movies.
Yeah, pretty
that
much.
makes you realize that
both of them given by Randall.
Right, and it's you realize that Randall is he appears lazy, he can be idiotic sometimes, but the dude, deep down, he's a good guy.
Yeah,
and
we just talk more about Clerks than any of the other movies.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. We'll come back to that because Clerks 2 is coming. Okay, so our next day, our first movie was called Sister Amy. This one is based on a true story. Sort of. Most of it, they said that I think it was 5.25%. Yeah, 5.25% was truth. It's mostly because nobody knows large swaths of the story because much of it took place within the company of three characters, none of whom are probably going to tell the truth about it.
Right.
So we don't know.
It also happened in the 20s.
Right.
So.
It happened in the 20s. There's probably not many records. So there's enough to make this movie, though. This is the first one that we kind of disagree on. That we're going to disagree on. I liked it a little bit more than Chase did. We both definitely felt like it was fairly slight. The story that it's telling could have been a little more gone into. We just had different reactions overall. So the story follows Sister Amy Semple McPherson, who was an evangelist in 1926 Los Angeles. And she is kind of in the limelight. She's the most famous evangelist in that period at that time. And she's tired of it. She doesn't want to do it anymore. She's kind of promiscuous, and she falls into the snares of a stranger named Kenny, played by Michael Mosley, who kind of basically gives her the chance to escape to Mexico and fake her death in the process. And he's got something there to do too. So he brings her along, and it kind of starts a manhunt. But the manhunt is not what this is about. That happens in the background as the family members and law enforcement look for her. The story, though, follows their trek to Mexico and kind of falling into a series of fairly intense plots. And they get a translator and a driver named Ray, played by Andrea Suarez Paz, who has a secretive past herself that eventually comes into picture. I won't give anything away, but she's kind of a local legend, and nobody really knows who the figure is, and it's her. In any case, she kind of leads them along on this journey, and they kind of are dealing with what's his name? There's been it's right after, I think, the Mexican Civil War, or whatever that was called, Mexican War. Mm-hmm. Anyway, some war has just happened where General it starts with an S, and I know like Texas and Mexico history really well. What am I doing? Anyway, so some war has happened. Some general has been. I'm so sorry, folks. Again, all these facts and figures are swirling around in my head. In any case, they go along on this journey, and the film takes kind of the approach of a Coen Brothers movie, in terms of the fact that it's very nihilistic about the futility of life. Nothing really means anything, and so yes, this is not an evangelical movie. It just happens to be about an evangelist, and somebody who's completely just done with society and wants to leave, and breaks away and breaks the law while doing that. And so it takes a Coen approach, which I appreciated, and that's pretty much at the center of why I'm slightly recommending this. It's a B- for me. I'm just going to give that away now. I think that it's due in large part to the confidence of the performances. The filmmaking isn't so interesting in terms of the aesthetic. It's very, again, blunt lighting, sort of like Ophelia in that way. Very blunt lighting, but it also fits the dusty chestnut backgrounds of these desert settings and small towns and all that. And it's pretty well choreographed and designed in the background, I thought. There's a musical number that comes at the end, I think, kind of hits the nail on the head a little too hard, for me at least. But in any case, it's pretty fun. It's pretty fun to watch this. I think it could have gone deeper. It's probably the slightest recommendation I'm making. And in any other like mode, I guess I could go with a C+, but I'm just not prepared to say I can't quite recommend it. So yeah, B- for me. There's really not much to say about this one.
It's a fast watch. It's a very straightforward
it's 87
watch.
minutes, including all the credits.
Right. But the issue for me is that it takes too long to finally get into. And on top of all that, we don't really ever get to know, McPherson's inner feelings. We don't know like why she's actually doing this. She just does it, kind of even becomes bored with it, and then goes back to her life. And it's just like, well, what was the overall like self-discovery of this character? It wasn't there for me. But I will agree with you. It has that kind of fun Coen Brothers aesthetic. They use a lot of gags in this film, a lot of suspenseful like shootout scenes, all from the composition of the cinematography. A lot of surprises, whether it be visual gags or the suspenseful moments. I like the way it was shot, and that's what kind of reminded me of the Coen Brothers film. But it was fine. It's a fine little movie. I'd probably give the same grade as you, but I wouldn't I don't know if I would recommend it. But if you want to watch something different, go for it. I'm actually more interested in the real story. Give me a miniseries. Give me a 4-hour doc on this thing, because this is incredible stuff with what she did back in the day, and then, of course, faking her death and coming back. It's crazy stuff. So I would rather have seen a real-life, true to tale, and I appreciate them taking the more just straightforward entertainment approach, but it just wasn't enough for me.
Gotcha. Really not much more to say. We'll move on to our next movie. So this next one is called American Factory. This one comes from directors Stephen Bognar and Julia Reichert, who basically opened the movie with footage from 2008 when a GM plant in Dayton, Ohio closed, sending the local ecosystem and infrastructure into kind of meltdown mode. It was right there in the midst of the housing bubble crisis that affected so much else about everything, businesses started, failing because of demand and all of that capitalistic stuff that I don't understand. But it failed, and it sent a lot of people into free fall economically. And now fast forward about 7 years to 2015, and an international company has taken over that plant. It's the Fuyao Group, which specializes in glass manufacturing, and they have decided to open Fuyao Glass America right there in Ohio, and in the process have actually kind of intrigued and invited a lot of the former workers at the old GM plant to come in, and especially with one guy that we follow had been there for like 15 years, so he knew his way around and where other people didn't. So anyway, the chairman is Chao Wang, who wants to basically think about it in these terms. Sometimes our jobs will go to China. This is that situation in reverse. Yeah. China's opening a factory of theirs in our country to be run by our people, or so they want to have happen.
Right.
It turns out that it isn't so simple, and
shocker, there's a culture clash.
Yes, exactly, because of some very complicated stuff. This is one of the better movies at the film festival.
It's one of the few I'm comfortable giving an A to.
Yeah, exactly, and I'd give it an A-. If we're bringing up grades, whatever. I have to be so in on an A from the get-go, or it has to work itself up to it. It never quite did that, but it's whatever. It's really good. Mm-hmm. Basically, the dynamic here is between the Chinese workers who come in to fill supervisory positions over the American workers who are going to be learning all of the techniques. And so here's an interesting thing. So, of course, in China, work shifts are longer, much, much longer. We have 8-hour shifts here. For those from China who are listening to this, potentially, that's how that works. We have 8-hour shifts. We have weekends off. We have, in some cases, hour-long lunches. In some cases, 30 minutes. Here it's 30 minutes. Mandated lunches that are not paid. We clock in and out of lunch, and I don't do that in my current job, but I did it for years at Target, and I did it for 9 months before that at Walmart, and it's that one was an hour. Target's generally 30 minutes, and then we have also 15-minute breaks in between clocking in for the day and lunch, and then between lunch and clocking out. So those are paid. You just go in the back and sit. So that's not how it is, and it paints it very, very specifically. That's not how it is in China, at the factories that operate there. They do eat, but it's not. It's all in a sort of communal way, and there's very little time for families, in terms of them going home because they live at the place that they work.
Sometimes they see him once or twice a year.
Yeah, once or twice a year. It's insane. And so now you have some of these workers already only see their families once or twice a year. They're working on visas. They can't go back home.
Right.
And now they're going to be 3 years away from a family they rarely see. So it's very complex. Meanwhile, Americans are allowed more freedoms. So jobs are predicated on that, and thus, So an interesting thing happens. We see that both of these systems have an advantage and a disadvantage. Broadly speaking, there's probably littler ones on a more specific level, but broadly speaking, there's an advantage and disadvantage in each one. So with the American system, of course, you have the freedom to see your family every night. You have the freedom to go to lunch and clock in and out for that. Again, I don't know if that's the system that they have. I don't think so, though. You have the break times and weekends off. Unfortunately, though, it seems like the disadvantage. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is that it affects efficiency because people get complacent. They aren't as watchful of, say, cooling temperatures of glass. So multiple situations here where glass cracks or explodes, and it's usually the fault of the American machines and the people running them, usually the American ones. So you have that. You have this freedom, but also a lack of efficiency. Now, it's basically, it's almost, but not quite reversed in terms of the Chinese workers, the case of the Chinese workers. So you have this sense of community. You know, we have to kind of be all one, all working on the same level. So that's why there's long work shifts. There's little time for breaks or nonsense. Nobody talks with each other while they're working. Anything like that. They all work long hours, and there's an efficiency there because of, I mean, we see it firsthand. It's insanely fast. But you are also incredibly isolated, and that's where it actually mines it for humor early on, and then it ultimately twists it to be more of the sincere and dramatic thing later on. But then you have the meeting point between these two groups of workers, because you have the Chinese workers are completely bemused and almost amused by and kind of jealous of the freedoms that Americans have. But then you have the American workers who go over to China to look at one of their factories, at like the way that, for instance, there's essentially a basic military training kind of vibe to how they all collect inward with each other and have this like mantra, and they stand at attention and all of this. So it's a really interesting examination of these two very different worlds coming together, and I think that's pretty much the main draw for me for why I liked it so much. But there's also the fact that Wagner and Reichert also take a personal approach, so that we follow a couple of people here. There's Wang, who works in the furnace at this new plant, and I think
Wang is us, because Wang comes to the realization that there's problems in both cultures, and there's no way to fix it.
Yeah, he basically comes to America with a certain set of expectations of what he's going to experience from the American workers, because of the fact that he knows from afar all of this freedom stuff, but he doesn't realize that a lot of people work two jobs, so there's all the stress of that. So he comes to certain realizations that break down his expectations.
He thought every American lived like a king, and it's like, that's not the case. You are actually similar to every single American worker that is in this situation.
Meanwhile, and this is where there's some prickly stuff at the corners of this storytelling, you have this kind of Midwestern town where many people probably wouldn't welcome the idea of a foreign company coming in and taking over their beloved plant.
Which some of the American workers, they don't explicitly say, but they word it in a way where, like, I don't kind of want these people here.
Right, exactly. And it's in a very much these people kind of way, right? And it's disheartening, but then you have this one guy, I forgot his name, I think his name is Ed, maybe, and he's Wong's best friend at the company,
right? That guy,
where he loves this guy. He's come to respect him. They comes
over to
really
the house,
well. He invites him over for Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah.
Gives them guns to shoot, which is really funny because, of course, in China you can't have those. So, and it's just an interesting examination of this culture clash. I feel like the title maybe could have been a little bit different. American Factory is kind of bland. I guess I get what they're going for, but in any case, really good documentary. And I think that Netflix picked this up, but I don't think it has any sort of drop date yet. I think it was within the past few weeks, because it just played at DocFest. That was its premiere. I believe it hadn't played anywhere before that. So,
and then when we were at our screening, the person presenting the film literally told us that night, Netflix just got this.
Yeah.
So it was a deal that probably closed like a day before. Or something.
Probably so. And I'm sure out of DocFest, because I had seen a review pop up. I think it was on Saturday or Sunday, so it had just played.
Right.
And then Netflix picked it up, and it's kind of perfect for them. I mean, it's not a huge cinematic event.
No.
It's not Koyaanisqatsi Katsi or Baraka or whatever, some beautiful documentary about nature.
Yeah, it's a perfect in-home doc.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If you want a really intriguing documentary telling, enlightening you about a kind of culture clash and teaching you about certain cultures.
But ultimately realizing we're all the same.
But ultimately, yes, exactly. It's a very unifying theme by the end. It's really good. So A- for me, A from Chase. Fantastic documentary.
Yeah. I think the biggest draw for me is seeing the documentary like what you and I discussed. Well, two fronts. One, they show the empathy for both cultures where people in China are going through the same thing we're going through, but like you said, the mindset is just kind of switched a little bit, but ultimately unifying as we said. And then two, the directors don't ever present any conclusion or any answer. They just go, listen, this is what's happening. This is obviously a problem if you're not blind to it, but we don't know how to fix it. It's just more of a literal sense of documenting these people in this process and just, having you decide at the end, like, whether this is right or wrong. But hopefully, I hope most people are like, this is wrong. I wish workers weren't treated this way.
Yeah. And, really good. So, all right, guys, Wednesday almost didn't happen. So, we live in Texas, and Texas is, a lot of people like to make this joke. It's extremely common. Texas is the state of, every season, because any given day could be any given temperature or climate status or whatever. It's insane. So on Wednesday there was this looming apparent threat of hailstorms out the butthole.
It was covering the upper half of the state.
Yes.
The entire upper half. I'm like, where's this coming from?
State.
Yeah.
And we did get rain. I'll get to the meat of this later on, but basically it was incredibly difficult to face because we would have had to drop 3 movies from our plans, and I just wouldn't have liked that, because then Chase would have only been able to see 8.
Yeah.
And that would have been barely even worth it. And so we were really hoping that the heaviest day wasn't going to be affected by it, and ultimately it didn't. It rained, but it didn't do anything else.
So dumb.
It's really dumb. So
we took precautions as responsible adults do,
and
but
they were
ultimately
completely unnecessary.
Yeah, completely unnecessary. It made me so angry because I didn't have any money budgeted for an Uber because I have a car now. So I was like, Joel, we're gonna drive in my car every single day.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to spend this much on Uber because of this supposed storm, and nothing happened. I'm going to sue the news stations. That's where I'm at, where I want to call them and leave an angry voicemail and be like, you said it was going to be this. Nothing happened. What do you have to say for yourself? And I think the answer they're going to give is, oh, the machines were off. The radar was off. It was way off.
Yeah, it was.
Stop it with that.
It was pretty bad. But in any case, we were able to see the movies. So the first one was Girls of the Sun. Now, this one tells the story... Well... Okay, it tells 2 stories, kind of.
Right.
So one of the stories is about Matilda, a French war correspondent who has arrived in Kurdistan to be embedded in a group of soldiers and report on their duties. Obviously take photos, primarily a photojournalist. So that's kind of her side of the story. In her past, we don't really learn much. We learn it all in one scene, though. And that is the fact that her husband has died. Her daughter does not know and is back living with her grandparents, the daughter's grandparents. So the other more major part of the story follows Bahar, who is one of the Kurdish women in this battalion of soldiers.
She kind of heads the battalion.
Yes, she's kind of group leader, and she has formed this group, or at least joined this group. I don't think she formed it, but I think she joined it. She's the current leader, and because of injustices done, terrible injustices, including sexual assault, sex slavery, all kinds of horrors, to her and her younger sister. She had a family at one point. They've been murdered or captured. And now she's in this group. She never sleeps, basically. She dozes but never sleeps at one point. she says. And she's played by Golshifteh Farahani. The journalist is played by Emmanuel Bercot. Okay. So that's the basic setup, and it's
a female battalion rising up against ISIS to fight them.
Yeah, exactly. And part of the story is in the present. A large part of it's in the past when we have to learn some stuff about Bahar's past.
And this is based on real events, by the way. This happened in 2015.
It's not explicit. I don't know if is it explicitly based on real events, because I think that it's sort of it struck me because I couldn't find anything about that. I don't think it ever said in the. I mean, I think that it was giving dates about things that happened generally, but I don't think that this is explicitly based on a true story. Now, obviously, groups like this could exist.
It could be loosely based on something.
Yeah. But the reason that it feels like it's at least sort of semi-fiction is because the character of Matilda is based on Marie Colvin, who is the
that's true.
The journalist. Yeah. She just recently had a movie made about her called A Private War, starring Rosamund Pike in last year's Best Performance. Really good movie. Right down to the eye patch. Some of the stuff that, like the fact that she's been in Homs, Syria, which is where Colvin died. I think that they're basing the character. It's weird how they then twist that, but they base the character on her, right down to the eye patch, the demeanor. I think that it's very, very closely based on her without actually being her. And so, obviously, a story like this could have happened. I think that it certainly has the feel of a movie that is based somewhat on true events, stuff that could have happened, but it's not explicitly based on an event that it's telling us about. That's what I got. I haven't been able to find any information. I haven't looked very closely, but it's fairly clear in like the premise or the synopsis on a website that it says based on something such and such. And I haven't been able to find that,
but the overall subject matter is something that exists.
It's extremely realistic.
With
it's
kidnapping, slavery, and
it's based in reality. Yeah. It drops real names. It's real locations. Mm-hmm. So it easily could be a true story. Unfortunately, though, I think, and this is another one that we disagree on. I was not as impressed by this ultimately. Here's my problem with some of these movies, and I'm actually going to make a weird comparison. But a couple years ago, we reviewed it, Detroit, which was a similar situation for me, where basically it's retelling this terrible event. In that case, the torturing of black citizens by cops in the Algiers hotel in I forgot what year, but anyway. This is obviously another thing that could easily be real, but I think that sort of like Detroit and some of these other movies that are based on real events. What they're doing is they're focusing on what happens, and sometimes the how struggles, and that's ultimately where, for me, it has to pull through.
It's really funny you bring it out because Mark and I both like Detroit quite a bit, but he's on the same wavelength as you for this one.
Yes, yeah. Our friend Mark, he didn't review it, but he gave it the same rating that I gave that I'm giving it, which is 2 stars on my end. And yeah, I feel like we probably have the same thoughts. And for me, it was basically a matter of the movie kind of being caught between telling 2 stories. One was Matilda's story, and we don't get enough of that for it to be any more investing than it is. And
she bookends the movie, and it makes it seem like she's really important, but it loses focus for the huge chunk of the middle of the movie that you're like, why is she bookending this movie?
Right, and because it's the middle chunk is surrounding Bahar. Now, that's where maybe the stronger points of the story are, but I think that what the movie's so solely focused on is the horrors of her story, that it doesn't really offer any sort of insightful or useful perspective other than, wow, this was awful. And that's something that I've grown a little bit tired of. Films can be about horrible events and also be about the characters in a way that makes them more than two-dimensional. And here I felt like, because of the fact that we're just being told about the events of a life, it very lazily uses flashbacks to me, because so much of the story is in flashback. You could just make the movie, honestly, I mean, maybe, I don't know if it would be fixed by this, but of course, it's not my job to know what would fix a movie, but I think that I think that you can make a movie about the stuff in the flashbacks. It would be incredibly bleak, but then you could maybe end the movie on her point, on Bahar's point of joining this group. It would have been a hopeful note that maybe she'll now rise up in this group and make differences. In the past, very bleak. Lots of terrible stuff happens. But they spend so much time on it and so little time on the present that the present version of Bahar, the one that we're supposed to be invested in, struggles to actually have her own voice as a character other than relaying information to us through pensive looks and then it flashing back. And then like one of the flashbacks I think is like 30 minutes long. And that's a big chunk of the movie back to when she was trying to escape captivity with a group of people, all of whom formed this battalion, but one of whom is pregnant at the time of the captivity. Again, terrible events. I think that it's kind of only working on that single layer of effectiveness, though, and for me, it struggles because of that. So C for me, unfortunately. Interestingly enough, I feel like critically it's around where I am because I think this is in the 30s or something, 30s or 40s on Rotten Tomatoes, and so I think that a lot of people have tended to have the same thoughts. Now, Chase is not that far above me on this, but
right, I'm not saying
we do generally disagree on the effectiveness.
Yeah, it's not like this is some profound masterpiece or whatever, but I do think if you want to talk about the filmmaking and the performances, I think that that was enough to justify it for me just because it was a really powerful story. But I totally get where Joel is coming from. I'm not going to disagree with any of his points or any of Mark's points, but I thought the kind of really grounded and emotional hooks of the performances are what really sell it for me, make it really believable. The action scenes that the battalions kind of go through have this kind of urgent flair to it, almost like a Jason Bourne type of filmography. It's really investing and really kind of gets you hooked on an anxiety level that really makes you want them to succeed. So the whole kind of overcoming this and rising up and getting your revenge is what I really appreciate, but I'm not going to disagree with them on the focus of the movie and really going below that surface of torture and brutality, because it is really hard to watch, and they don't really go much beyond that, so can't disagree with you there. And then with the focus on the two characters is a little alarming, just because it doesn't have a clear focus, given the fact that the photographer bookends the movie, and that's all we really get. Maybe a few interactions here and there with her and Bahar, but yeah, it just ultimately comes down to a little less focused than I would have liked, but I still like the filmmaking and some of the performances. So, I'm not going to say like, oh, go out and see it, but if that is something that interests you, by all means, check it out. But I wouldn't recommend theater. Like, just rent it or stream it or whatever.
You basically have to be in the mood whenever you read the premise of this to be in like, okay, well, maybe I want to see a really downer movie about.
Well, it's like what you and I were discussing about Schindler's List. It's not like I pop in every day going, I'm going to watch this movie.
Right, yeah. And actually, even more so than the Bourne movies, what it reminded me of visually, and it was very effective visually, I think, was The Hurt Locker.
Right,
which,
that too.
Yeah, and very much down and dirty, very much like those action scenes. And so, in any case, all right, folks, our next movie is one of Chase's favorites, and I liked it quite a bit too. It's called Brian Banks. This is probably the most high-profile movie of the festival. It was the only screening of this movie,
right?
And it doesn't have a trailer. So basically, small note, at film festivals, or at least at this film festival, I don't know if they do this for every one, but at our film festival, what they do is they'll play like a loop in front of the movies of some of the movies that are playing. And generally, though, they only do that for movies that have like trailers. So we never even saw any sort of look of this.
Not even a poster.
Yeah, a poster. I think they had a screenshot from it for like there's a different kind of loop where they have screenshots of the movies if they don't have trailers, and this is one of those. It doesn't even have a poster. It doesn't have anything. So, but it's still the most high profile because of the fact that it comes from a pretty a director who was big in the 90s. It comes from Universal. They've already picked it up. There was a Universal rep at our screening. And
Bleecker Street, which is a pretty notable indie company.
Yeah, and so it was very high profile, and it tells the true story of Brian Banks, played in the movie by Aldous Hodge. He was a football player in high school. He was on his way to look at colleges for sports scholarships, and in July 2002, he is wrongfully accused of rape, kidnapping and sodomy, and sent to prison for 6 years.
6 years, then 5 years probation.
Yeah, 6 years, then 5 years probation. Basically was railroaded by the justice system. He had an incompetent lawyer and a judge who didn't want to do anything. The district attorney's office never even went to the place where it was supposedly happened. And it's interesting. A movie, it's not nearly as good as this movie, I don't think, but a movie that it reminded me of in terms of how thoroughly it convinces us of his innocence. I mean, it's obviously a true life story, so it's true, but and this other thing isn't based on a true story, but how it goes through the steps of exonerating him so thoroughly and giving us all the points is if Beale Street could talk, when there was that and this guy couldn't have been there, right. And here it's a hallway this long, full of classrooms that were open and full of kids at the time that he supposedly dragged somebody past, and so anyway, the different like literal points of the case and the different things that supposedly were needed to have happened for this to have happened couldn't have happened, and it's a detailed kind of telling of that. In any case, I've been saying in any case a lot today. I'm going to try to stop doing that. At some point you start noticing this, guys, and you're like, wait, oh no. So he wants to, he's already, the story takes place in the last couple years of his parole.
Right.
Of his monitored parole. He has a parole officer who is constantly on him about staying away from parks because he has to do that, and he's got a the tracker thing that the GPS little monitor ankle bracelet that always goes with him. He's got to give up football because he can't be at parks and stadiums and stuff. So anyway, he wants to prove his innocence even though he's already served the time because he's unable to find work on the basis of the fact that he's an ex-convict.
And he's labeled as a sex offender.
He's in trouble of that. Right. And obviously has to give details about why he's been. So it turns people off, potential employers off, and it's a bad thing. So he wants to exonerate, basically remove all of those charges so that he has a clear field in terms of getting a job or working or going into the NFL, which is what he ultimately wants to do and does after this all happens. So of course this is a true story, guys. It was very high profile. I remember hearing about it. I don't know if Chase did, but I remember hearing about this because my dad follows football, and so I remember hearing about Brian Banks. And
who's your dad's favorite team? I'm curious now.
Dallas Cowboys.
Is it really?
Oh, easily. We're from Dallas, guys. I mean, we're from near Dallas.
That's interesting. It was interesting because my dad's from Iowa. That's where he was born and raised. But his favorite team is the Chiefs for some weird reason, and that was in Kansas City. So I'm just like,
I don't know. I know my dad hates the Eagles,
as most Cowboys fans do.
I'm pretty sure that's the one. Yeah. So anyway, I remember hearing about it. The reason that I heard about it is because I think I saw around the time when he started with I think it actually might have been the Los Angeles, whatever they're called, the Los Angeles team that he joined before the Atlanta Falcons. I think it was back then, and unless he didn't play any games with them, I think he might have been in a game at one point in the off season, sometime where somebody mentioned him on a news story that I happened to be around, that he was the oldest rookie, and I was like, whoa, really? And then that's when Dad told me the whole thing. So
right.
It was a very high profile case in the sports world, at least.
It's one of the more iconic courtroom photos with his head on the desk while everyone's like trying to like calm him down because he was sentenced at that time and his life was just ruined. So he was like literally in tears in the courtroom.
That was, if you've never seen that photo, or if you have seen that photo, that's where that comes from. So, this is a good movie. Chase, I'm actually going to piggyback off Chase before he even makes this point, because he's going to make this point. But anyway, he said right after this that it kind of reminded him of a 90s movie. Now, this is apt because I think that it's working on a level of kind of blatant but effective manipulation of the audience's emotions in a good way. That it sort of does remind of the movies that were these kind of inspirational for families, but maybe about something more severe like this, that sort of populated the 90s. And
given the fact that it is directed by someone that worked primarily in the 90s.
Yeah, Tom Shadyack's the director here. He hadn't directed a movie since Evan Almighty back in 2007. Then, of course, sort of the combined box office failure of that and the fact that he got in a bicycle accident that was very serious, or cycling. I don't know if it was motorcycle or bicycle, but anyway, he hadn't directed a feature film with a plot since then. I think he directed one other thing, like a documentary, but other than that, he hadn't done anything.
In terms of high profile, it's been 12 years, and before that, I mean, basically, Evan Almighty's probably not the best one to mention as his last movie. Bruce Almighty, then.
Bruce Almighty was the one, I think, before that, and he had some rough years in terms of his career. He had Dragonfly, which bombed, I think. He had Evan Almighty, which kind of bombed. Bruce Almighty did well. But his best movies are stuff like The Nutty Professor and Liar Liar. So
Ace Ventura,
Ace Ventura. So it's interesting that he's kind of taking on this. It's a similar move, like Peter Farrelly did just recently with Green Book. And I think it has some of that same appeal. People who like Green Book are going to like this. People who don't like Green Book are not going to like this, because
I can see that.
Yeah, because it's not similar stories at all, but it's a very similar kind of old-fashioned kind of sensitized. I think it's a bit sensitized just because there's probably elements of this, and I feel like it's probably dodging around the way these characters talk. I think that there's probably a lot more vulgarity in the real story, but he turns it into what's easily going to be a PG-13 movie. I think there's only 2 F words here. So just because of the subject matter, it's probably going to be PG-13. But it's a very basic level of effectiveness on performances, on especially Aldous Hodge, who's really impassioned and compassionate here. I like Greg Kinnear. Greg Kinnear plays Justin Brooks, who is the co-founder of the California Innocence Project. He's the one who Brian goes to directly. In some cases, he just writes a generic letter to the project at first, but he deals with him on a face-to-face basis later on. And he's good here too. I think that he was smart to play him as kind of this weary guy who is really tired of the way that the legal system has treated people, and the things that he has to duck around as somebody who's trying to prove innocence for a lot of people who have been in jail wrongly for 20 or 30 years. He's reluctant to take this case on since the guy has finished his time, and that's a big hurdle. But in any case, this is a movie, literally, I think I can say that if you find this, it's almost like this is one of the few examples, I think, of this being true. Usually it's about how it's about something. That's what Ebert said. I think that this movie doesn't explore filmmaking a lot. It's very basically told, very basically structured. particularly the screenplay is that way. So, but the thing is that I think that if you're intrigued by this story, if you're intrigued by the story, I think you'll like it, basically because of the fact that the actors commit. You don't have a lot of corniness. Probably be misconstrued as corniness, but I think it's sincerity. I think it's, I've seen the differences. Recently, you had The Best of Enemies come out, and I hadn't seen it by the time we recorded, but I've since seen it. Awful. One of the worst movies of the year. Came out last week, 2 weeks ago. Terrible movie, and that's because it's so imprecise. Where this one is better put together, and so I think it's really well told. There's some surprises here that I didn't know, that some elements of the story that I wasn't aware of. There's some surprises involving some of the eyewitness testimony that was really shocking. We see how the accuser comes back into the story is amazing. I never knew about that. Again, I knew only the basics of the story, the fact that he had been in prison wrongly and had gotten out and become, at 27, the oldest rookie ever in the NFL. But I didn't know about the specific parts of this until seeing this movie. And looking it up, there's, of course, a coda here where you get some of the information after the fact, and you see some of the pictures of the cast members with their real-life counterparts. That all happens. That's all pretty much typical of this kind of thing.
Right.
They do duck around the fate of the accuser. I'm going to have to tell you that off air. But
yeah.
Did you? I don't know if you looked it up, but
I think I looked it up, but she got hit pretty hard, right?
Well, it's not even just that. I'll have to tell you off air. People who, I don't want to give anything away here, but it's pretty amazing what happens with her after the story ends, and they don't reveal that in the thing, probably because there's no interest there. You don't want to be interested in what the accuser did because of all the dynamics.
Well, dang, I was interested. I was infuriated. I was like, I want her to get out of here.
Right. And so, like I said, very basic level of effectiveness. I'm going to be a little less enthusiastic about the movie, generally speaking, than Chase is. Chase really liked this. I'm giving it a B. I think it's really solid, and it comes out in August. It's the one I think right now that is farthest out in terms of having an actual release date from the festival. There's some movies that don't have one, so. Yeah, anyway, very effective. It really surprised me. I didn't know what to expect with this one. I hadn't heard of it.
I didn't either.
Yeah, before we were scheduling stuff. But then, looking into the fact that Universal it's going to be a wide release. It comes, like I said, comes out August 9th. It's not going to be I don't think, at least right now, it's going to be limited with a later run. It's pretty much going out there immediately. August 9th, perfect release date because it's right after some heavy hitters.
They're going to push it for awards.
Yeah,
they are.
Yeah, Bleecker Street generally does. They pick most of their movies, if not all of them, to push, and so we'll probably get one.
Right. Yeah. No, I like the movie quite a bit, and it could be the festival effect where we've seen nothing but kind of bland, to slightly good movies, and this one felt superior to them. So that's why I might be writing a high on it, but. Yeah, just a good old-fashioned story. Had that 90s feel-good mentality. Even though you know where it's going to end, it's still amazing to watch. Aldous Hodge, this guy. Listen, the last thing I saw him in was The Hunk from What Men Want. An awful movie. So what a great turnaround.
Right.
The reason why he is so profound in this movie is that he starts out as a jock. He's kind of a meathead. He's strong. People like him. Then his life gets devastated. He goes to prison. You can see the fear in this man's eyes. He has a mental breakdown at one point. He has some emotional, rousing speeches that he gives and some really dense, meaty dialogue. He has the full gamut of this character in terms of performances that I was actually kind of shocked that he was able to pull all of them off as fluid as he did. Greg Kinnear, like you said, great supporting performance in the literal sense of supporting the story and the character as it progresses, and just giving a really genuine performance. Like, I believed everything that he was saying. I was like, yes, please, like, go help this guy. Like, go represent him. And then, of course, some other supporting people like Sherry Shepherd plays his mom. Very sweet, tender performance, just wanting to see her son triumph in this situation. Yeah, it's just...
And it's
really
seeing
great.
Shepherd in this kind of role because, in an alternate world, it might have gone to somebody more obvious like Viola Davis or
right.
something.
You don't need that.
Yeah, you don't need that.
You don't need... Because Greg Kinnear is the most high-profile actor in this movie. But he's even not even like overshadowing the story, so it works.
Yeah. I remember being... At least my introduction to Sherry Shepherd was in Precious. She plays the person at the school who, really really good actress. I see her every once in a while. I know that she's part of television shows I've not seen.
Right.
I wish she was in more movies at least. So,
and I would give it an A. And it might be the festival effect, but I'm telling you, like, kind of a lackluster year. So when a movie like hits you in the face like that, I had to sit there and go, wow, that was actually like really good. Now, a few months from now, I might watch it and be like, man, I'm a little tempered on this movie, but for right now, I quite loved it. So,
like in August, I'm gonna give this a C+. I'm just kidding.
That would be amazing if I had that big of a turnaround.
Right. All right. So the last movie of Wednesday was a documentary. Our only other documentary together. Or wait, no. Was it our only? No, it was one of our two documentaries together. My third one.
But our last documentary of the festival.
Our last documentary, yeah. So this one was called Midnight Family. It was very short, so we were able to see it at 10 p.m. and get out pretty quickly. All right, so the setup of this documentary has a really shocking fact right at the beginning. So apparently in Mexico City, which is a city of about 9 million people, there are only 45 operating government ambulances. So in any case, it's really strange, like how in a city the size and with a population of something like L.A. or whatever, you only have 45 ambulances. It's incredible. So in the wake of this kind of institutional failure to serve the people, some privately owned ambulances pop up, and this film follows a single family that operates one of those. It's the Ochoa family. The father's name is Fernando. He's called Fur by everybody else, and he's under a lot of strain. His health seems to be kind of in question. He's taking a bunch of medicine all the time. He's coughing and extremely tired because of all he has to deal with. But anyway, he has some sons, a nephew, and his brother. I think a nephew at least. And his brother are operating this ambulance for people in the city. They go on different calls. The calls are really intense, well shot, and just incredible to behold. There's one of their calls involves a young woman who has been headbutted by her boyfriend. And so she's got they avert her face because clearly she didn't, she was fine with her voice being in there, but not her face.
She's also a minor.
She's also a minor. Yeah, she's 18. So yeah. Anyway, the calls are amazing here, and it also ends on a really tragic one that I won't get into. But interestingly enough, here's the thing. So I've had a day and a half ish to think about this movie. So Chase and I came out initially kind of having similar thoughts, and we still have similar overall thoughts about this. But I think that we're gonna part ways just a little bit on the aspect I think that works most about this, and it's something that I brought up to him. And it's something that stayed in my head. So I'll let Chase describe tell you all what his I hate to call it favorite part, but whatever. The thing that he found most intriguing about this. But I found something else really intriguing other than the calls. And they don't go into this deep enough, but they do bring up a lot of interesting ideas, and that's why I think this movie works. So early on, I got this weird feeling in my bones that there was a certain performative aspect to this family. Not with Fernando, and not with the youngest son, Josue, I think is his name, Josue, something. Josh, I think honestly it's the Spanish name for Josh, so I'll just call him Josh. Not the youngest son, not the father, not the uncle or whatever, the father's brother. They don't seem to be performing to me, but the kind of the ringleader of the group happens to be Fernando's 16-year-old son Juan, who is a paramedic, and he is also kind of a salesman. Now, here's the other aspect to this story that's really interesting. Because they are privately owned, they also have to be privately funded, which means that these ambulances have to make money in order to stay operational. So it becomes basically a grossly capitalistic process. They, at one point, it seems like they're either accepting or handling a bribe. Basically they have to do anything for money, and in some cases, it's bringing patients actually farther than they technically need to, so that they can go to a privately owned, because otherwise they won't get paid for it. So it's pretty amazing. And at the center of it is Juan, who seems to be selling his business to the audience. So there's a bit to him that felt like whenever we were capturing a phone call or whatever, it felt staged. Now, that was a wrong feeling, and I'm not accusing the director Lorenzen of staging everything, but it felt staged. And I think that the reason is because they're so bent on making money that they want to look good for the camera that's following them around right now. So I thought that was really interesting, particularly as it reaches the ending. And, after that last call that I'm talking about, the tragic one, really tragic one, it's brought up again, this idea of selling the business. And for me, I thought that was what was most valuable, even more so than these intense calls that are as intense as they are, because of the fact that Lorenzen puts his camera on the dashboard of the ambulance, so that whenever they're streaking through the streets in their car, we're in a single place while everything else is moving around, and so it's disorienting. It's like any good, it's not choreographed in this case, but it's like any good chase scene in a movie that does the same thing. You're disoriented because of everything else that's moving around the car. Usually it's faked in movies, but here it definitely isn't. And there's definitely an element of suspense and real tension there, and terrifying. It's pretty terrifying. So I don't think that they go deep enough in any of this. It's only about 81 minutes with credits and all of that. I think that it's weird. It's like length has plagued some of these movies that are a festival, but weirdly enough, not the longest one, but some of these movies, and this and something like Leave the Bus Through the Broken Window were too short, I think, for their own good. I think I'm of two minds about serializing something like this. I think it would maybe too intense, and you'd be spending time with some people that are sort of difficult to warm up to. It's easy to empathize with them, but it's hard to warm up to them. I don't think that you'd be able to spend time in this, maybe with them at their home, but in this business in the ambulance, and come away liking them very much because of how how conniving some of these people are. Not in an evil way, just in a we got to make money any way we can way. And so it's interesting. It doesn't go deep enough. I'd give it a B-. I think that's my grade. It works very basically on the level of giving us some interesting characters to follow. It just doesn't afford them enough time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the ambulance calls are exhilarating, and they work on a suspenseful level like you would see in a fictional film, and also an emotional level when they actually meet up with the people that are at the accident scene. It's kind of rough to watch. Some of them cry, break down, and feel that pain, and they're trying to calm these people down and stuff. And so that is without a doubt fantastic. The family that we're following are very likable. The little kid looks like the kid from Deadpool 2 and the that kid. He looks exactly like him. It's hilarious, but like it's a fun family to follow. And the whole business side of it is, like, you wince there in your seat because you know that, unfortunately, with like the medical business, they're there to help people, but it's also a business and they have to make money. And you're right. If you're a privatized ambulance, you have to make money. I'm sorry. Like, it's the way it goes. It's the same thing with funeral homes. It's a tricky business because it's still a business. They have to ask for money, but these people that they're asking money from, they're mourning the death of their loved one. So it's one of those weird scenarios. And that's why that the older kid, he's 16, he kind of has that mindset because his family's trying to survive. They're trying to eat. They're trying to pay the bills, and like he understands that. So it's a very tricky situation. But I agree with you. It's way too short. Doesn't really explore the family that much beyond these calls. They show them a couple times at their house, but that's about it. Yeah. They show the kid once at school. I would like to see how it affects him doing these night calls, then going to school literally the day after. Usually with fictional films, you and I agree that we shouldn't get on our high horse and be like, you should have made a movie this way. Documentaries are a little different because documentaries are set out to display a subject matter and have a biased viewpoint, maybe not have a biased viewpoint, but just, present something in the most truest and realest way you can. Unfortunately for this family is not enough. If they would have taken more the approach of showing maybe another privatized ambulance family, maybe one that's owned by the government, and kind of show how everyone is reacting and like interweaving with each other throughout the night and stuff, I think that would have been more interesting and a little bit more richer for our liking rather than just this family. So a lot of great ideas presented. It just falls short for me. I'm with you, B-. Definitely a disappointment.
Yeah. All right, so last day, this was yesterday. First things first, I watched Clerks 2, and I loved that movie.
Thank you, finally.
So much, even more than the first one. I think it's amazing, and I think that...
the final speech, man.
The final speech is incredible, once again, given by Randall.
Yep. Randall's very philosophical.
Yeah, he is. Surprisingly
he really is.
So. But, man, why wasn't Rosario Dawson given all the awards for that? Because her performance is just... amazing. And
the relationship she has with Dante is pure. It's
exactly,
a pure relationship.
Yeah. And it was another case of them giving it an R, probably because they remembered, we probably shouldn't give it an NC-17. And there was no unrated cut on DVD. It was that. So, yeah, great movie. And I love that. So, anyway, back to festival movies. Our second to last was Shadow. Now, this one comes from director Zhang Yimou. This is a guy who's directed stuff like Hero, House of Flying Daggers, Judo, a bunch of other movies. Has been working for years, and this is his latest. So this one is a very simple story. A commander is dying, and because of an ancient kind of an agreement that had been made between the two nations, he's supposed to fight the king, and or at some point fight a commander in a different nation. But because he's dying and he's been injured, he decides to hire a double. Now, both the commander and his double are played by Chow Dang. It's a very good performance, so good that I had no idea that it was the same person until this morning.
He literally did not notice that until this morning when I was doing my review for YouTube. He was like, it's the same guy.
Yeah, and it's amazing because of the fact that in one instance, I don't know how they did this, but one instance, he's got facial hair, so clearly they shot, I'm thinking what happened is they shot all of the stuff with him. Then they had him kind of clean himself up, shave, and then they shot the other stuff.
And then when they would film a scene with both of them in it, like they got some really good body doubles or some really great CGI work.
And it's incredible. So of course, as with Zhang, it's all about kind of the visual grace, and there's a lot of it here. He uses primary colors, flamboyant colors, a lot in his movies. House of Flying Daggers is one of the most colorful movies ever made, just in terms of the different complexities of the color that he works with. Hero is another example of that, and even something like The Great Wall, he directed that from a couple years ago. not him in his finest element, but also very colorful, attractive movie. This one, though, is different because for the first time, at least that I know of, he's working with grays, blacks, a lot of, I think it's essentially dichromatic between gray and white. There's some black in there too. It's mostly gray. But he uses those colors as well as he ever used any of the bigger, brighter colors that he used in the past. So it's still a film of stunning visual beauty, but it's just in a different context than one is used to with Jacques. So, yeah, this one's good. The fight scenes in this movie grow increasingly bloodier, first of all, and also are some of the most enjoyably over-the-top, ridiculous, like it turns into a wacky, just with hardened noises and brutal blood. I mean, it's still insane.
It reminded me a lot of like anime. Like if this was actually animated, it probably would have been even better. Yeah, it would have been. It would have been pretty crazy. And yeah, at one point, armored umbrellas. Oh, it's fantastic.
Because the fighting style that they use, I don't know what it is. I think it's wuxia, but it's interesting. So they basically, one person has this. I think it's bamboo. Originally bamboo. I think it's bamboo, or something like that. Some wood that, and then the other person has an umbrella, a giant umbrella. Now, eventually, it becomes a fight between a guy with a spear. Kind of, I can't remember what he called it, but it's basically a spear, and it's big long staff type thing with a giant freaking blade on the end of it. The other guy has this umbrella that comes out in blades, and sort of like there's actually one of these, a cane gun. I don't know if you've ever seen these, but they look like canes. You cock them by pulling them. Right. And then you can push a button on the side and a bullet comes out. It's sort of like that, where you cock it in the middle and then it shoots. I think it's two at a time, two or three at a time, wearing blades, and of course they cause some damage. But of course, this is also about the power dynamics between these two nations, and there's a sort of an arranged marriage aspect going on where this is sort of in the background. It's mostly about this. Well, one is about a romance, not very convincing one, between, interestingly enough, one actor and another actor, even though it's three characters in the triangle. That's so fascinating to me to watch that now, knowing that it's the same actor, because you have him reacting to potentially just an actress with nobody there, and then the other one. Anyway, it's really great. The actor who plays both those roles, Chow Dang, really good here. In both roles, he makes them different in a convincing way, and so yeah, I mean it's mostly about these various power dynamics between the nations. Very simple, straightforward story structure. Not hugely memorable. Some of the details are leaking out of my head. But what you're going to remember it for, and the reason that it's good, is because of this wild, throwdown, smackdown, no holds barred action scenes. That, I mean, at one point you have this diversion that has been planted, and of a fight between a guy with the metal umbrella with the prongs and all of that, and this dude with a giant freaking spear. I'm just going to always call it that. The giant freaking spear.
It really is.
It is. And that's a diversion for an infiltration of the city, and you have these dudes like in spinning things wearing
like
crossbows,
mini crossbows,
mini crossbows on their arms, so that whenever they're coming through and they're spinning like tops inside two of those metal umbrellas sandwiched together. Shooting outside so that they're able to dispatch a lot of enemies at once. It's so over the top and wild and exciting and tense and unforgivingly violent at times, and it's just so much fun. I can't stress that enough. This is as exciting and generally engaging as any summer blockbuster. I mean, this is going to be, in the summer blockbuster arena, because it comes out on May 3rd. It's expanding after that. and I can't wait for people to see it. I'm telling you, even if you don't like movies with subtitles, first of all, start liking them. Two, it won't. I don't think it'll turn that aspect will turn you off at all. If it does, okay. But still, this movie is fun on the basis of being an engaging piece of action filmmaking. I can't go any higher than a B just because of all the story elements that are ultimately going to wisp out of your head like ghosts or mist or whatever. You're not going to remember the plots. That's why I have to write my review pretty quickly. I haven't done that yet, but
it almost reminds me of like a really definitely a smarter version, but like just a good old fashioned American blockbuster where the plot is really simple. People go for the spectacle, and then you leave feeling somewhat happy.
Yeah,
that's what it feels like.
Yeah. There's a little, and you're right. There's a little bit of dignity to it too. Like there's real like heft, and it's not just it's so well cut, well edited. The action isn't it's far from incomprehensible. You can follow every single movement because
it's not Taken 3 type of editing.
Yeah, this is the good version of slow motion photography. Right. There's a lot of it here, and it's really well incorporated because Zhang does that a lot. That's his bread and butter. I think that honestly might be where Zack Snyder got it because he probably watched stuff like House of Flying Daggers and Hero, used that a lot, and again, it's really effectively made. And I got a kick out of it. I really liked it, and it's surprisingly funny in in sort of a low key way too. There's some the whole setup is absurd where he has to find a double, so it's kind of a comic plot in the midst of all this dramatic stuff that's happening. Overall, a drama, but you're gonna get some wit out of it. I don't want to say you're gonna laugh like a comedy, but you're gonna get some wit out of it. The whole setup is. It's kind of absurd, and
I just think overall it was a enjoyable experience. I love the black and white, and gray cinematography. I told you it kind of reminded me of like a graphic novel, or Frank Miller did this movie. Like this is what it would look like. And the action was superb. The choreography was nice. You could see everything. It wasn't fastly cut. You have wide shots. It's bloody. It's brutal. It's politically intriguing. The acting is good. And what it boils down to for me, it felt like an Asian Game of Thrones. Yeah. That's what it was. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Maybe a little less sex.
Yeah, I was going to say, without the forced HBO nudity, it has pretty much every element. But yeah, it's violent, it's entertaining. The performances are sometimes wacky, like you said, and over the top, but it works for that story. Yeah. I may not remember it by next week, but I think in the moment, and even when we're speaking about it right now, some of the story elements might fly out of our ears a little bit because the romance was a little whatever, and it was a little slow for me to start. But we will remember those action sequences towards the end of the year, for sure.
Yeah. There's a showdown between two characters who you never thought would be.
Right.
You know who I'm talking about. And I think that's one of the scenes of the year.
It was awesome.
It's amazing, and there's a Shakespearean aspect to how that plays out. I mean, right down to the wire, the final moments between them. It's and really, I mean, it's Shakespearean all throughout. But that particular
when you're dealing with like kings and like the fight for power, there's always going to be a betrayal and assassins everywhere.
Yeah,
so
exactly, it's Shakespeare. So it's a good movie, guys. It opens in some places on May 3rd. If you can catch it, then definitely do it. I don't know about any sort of wider release, but hopefully it does get one because I'm a fan. We're both a fan. So all right,
here we go.
Last movie. This is my favorite movie of the festival.
We apologize to our viewers with kids that are listening. You know who you are because I've talked to you. But we're about to say the D word here, but that's okay because it's a part of the film's title.
It's the title and it's a name of a character, but it's also an incredible innuendo.
Yep.
All right, so our final movie is called The Death of Dick Long. Okay.
Joel, it is the death of Richard Long. Why are you so crass with this?
Bleep. Okay.
That is what it's called.
It is called that. Okay, so guys, there's gonna be some level of tiptoeing around some stuff here. I'm I'm gonna be struggling over my review. I'm gonna write it tonight. I'm gonna give myself a little bit of time. It's not one I'm gonna forget, so that's nice.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm gonna be going home and immediately writing Shadow. This one I'm gonna sit on it just a little bit to figure out what about this plot I need to reveal, because I hesitate, and I think I'm gonna go one way with it in this particular talk that we're having. But I'm of two minds, because the reason that this movie is so bold and absurd and surprising and heartbreaking ultimately has to do with a plot element that is honestly very discomforting. It is very, very discomforting. And yes, in some very twisted way, and Chase is going to explode out of his head skull right now. It has to do with that innuendo because of where it goes. But anyway, all right. Here's the general setup of this movie. The general setup is that there are three members of a band. Dick Long is one of them. There's also Zeke Olsen and Earl Wythe. I have to give their whole names because of the fact that Dick Long has a name. So, anyway, Dick, Earl, and Zeke. Yes, sorry, I forgot it again. And Zeke are practicing one night, and they decide to go out and get weird. That's what they call it. And they go out into a field, and the night ends with Dick having died at the hospital. They have dropped his body off, and they do not want anybody to know how he died. All right, so this is a movie that... Okay. See, this is why I'm struggling to know what to reveal.
Right. Because people will be turned off,
yes,
and they will completely write off this movie because of the
yes,
long joke that we have, so to speak.
There's going to be some critics. Once, I don't know how widely this has been reviewed yet. I think it showed at Sundance, so there's probably some there.
There's actually someone that follows me on Twitter that commented below my blurb for the movie, and she hated it.
Yeah.
But I know her taste, and we don't really agree on much, but I can see people reacting that way.
Yeah.
There were 3 people that walked out of her screening. People were confused afterwards.
Yeah. So okay. All right. This is really tough. So there's an element here where the surprise comes, and suddenly the movie resembles another one I'm about to bring up.
Ooh, we haven't talked about this. So this is
a
complete surprise for me.
You know what it is because it comes from the co-director of it.
Right.
Okay. So this comes from director Daniel Scheinert. Now, he was once paired with, and I'm assuming they're going to still work together at some point.
They do have an untitled project together coming up.
They do. And he was one of the Daniels who directed Swiss Army Man back in 2016. Of course, that was the film that starred Paul Dano as a man who finds himself stranded on an island, and now he's close to death, and he notices a body played by Daniel Radcliffe that ends up being very useful in various different ways as literally a Swiss Army man.
What a professional way to put it.
Yes, exactly.
You don't want to say the obvious?
It's interesting because our friend Mark Dusick reviewed Swiss Army Man, and he had a really good thing to say about it. Basically, it was always teetering on crumpling underneath its own absurdity.
Right.
But what it did ultimately was it grounded the emotion of the project, even though it obviously basically took place on kind of an Earth that's almost not quite ours. It's just sort of removed. It's almost Earth adjacent. It's not explicitly said, but you can tell that it's
otherworldly but grounded.
This is
at
a
the
version
same
of
time.
Earth that the filmmakers have kind of imagined, even though it's really close to our own. And this is even closer to our own because it takes place in Alabama, not on an island. But okay, so he's died. They are trying to hide the fact that he's dead, even though they deliver him to a hospital. Zeke decides that has ended up with his wallet, and decides that he's going to part company of the wallet and the ID. So those end up in different places in the story, but they really don't want people to find out how he died. That's an important thing here.
Yeah.
And it's something that, again, I'm struggling with revealing because it's so weird. But if you can imagine, basically, Swiss Army Man was a movie in which directors used a dead body in a manner of death, sort of, as a way to build a really absurd comic premise. This one stretches the word comic to its lengths, but because it's extremely bad what happens. But it still mines a lot of laughs out of the hiding process, and it's also still kind of connected to this really absurd situation that they found themselves in. So it's distinctively a comedy, but...
Well, because they tap into that whole notion of, like, when people die, sometimes it is not the most flattering.
Yeah.
And you, unfortunately, have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Like, dude, I mean, when you think about Elvis, it's like he died going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
That's pretty embarrassing.
Yeah.
But, like, that sometimes happens.
Yeah.
And so that you have to deal with those kind of, like, life situations. But in this one, takes it to that comedic element, but it hones it back and it shows the kind of harsh reality that these characters have to do afterwards.
It ultimately, and Swiss Army Man did the same thing. It ultimately becomes this sincere study of loneliness. Mm-hmm. And here, it's also about loneliness. We ultimately find that out to be the case here. I won't tell you how.
They make themselves isolated from this incident because they're so embarrassed by it. They don't want to tell the truth, and that unfortunately pushes everyone out. Then they eventually crumble under pressure when they're interviewed and stuff. So it's just... Yeah,
the screenplay here by Billy Chu is really carefully constructed in terms of how it reveals all of this information. It doles it out. We find out the truth by the halfway point. That was actually Shiner was there along with the screenwriter to kind of explain some of the stuff when people asked him. But you get a major bit of information halfway through. That's why I'm struggling with revealing it, because I feel like anything within the first 30 minutes is game. And that's basically what happens here is they hide the body, or they dump the body. I'm sorry. They dump the body. They hide some of his stuff. They try to terribly try to dump the car. It backfires majorly.
Because they're not masterminds.
Right.
They are normal people like you and I, and that's what makes the situation comedic.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's a couple of cops, including a complete rookie, like who was on her first job, played by Sarah Baker.
Who didn't know that Dick was short for Richard.
Right.
She's like, what?
Yeah. That becomes a major thing later on. And and then an older cop who is...
super old, by the way.
Old.
She's like Granny Smith with a cane going, all right, we got to solve this case now.
She is sharp.
She's great.
She is very observant.
She even has the most insightful thing to say at the very end in terms of the death and how people will perceive it if the story breaks out and stuff. And I was like...
There's also a line here. It's not actually said by her, although she's in the scene.
Right.
There's a line that I love, and this is a movie that's very much in the vein of the Coens again. Mm-hmm. They actually... Daniel Shiner said... Or no, the screenwriter said Fargo was a big inspiration for this movie, probably the top one.
James Faust said people are comparing it to like a redneck Fargo.
Yeah. And... So there's a line here that I think actually could have come from the best of Coen dialogue, and I think it comes to sum up the whole thematic core. It's what I'm going to begin my review with when I write it, and it's people sure are inscrutable on their insides, aren't they? And I love that because it basically it pretty well sums up the kind of the thematic thread that they're working with. So again, I'm ducking around the plot here. It's really annoying to have to do this sometimes because I can't quite fully sell to you what this movie is like without without giving it away. And I don't want to give it away because that would give away the surprises. Now, is it a fun surprise? No, it's actually not. It's really, really not. That's why the word comic is stretched, but comedy can be honed pretty much from anything, and I think that there's very few exceptions. Maybe some historical events couldn't be, but in general situations I think could be. and this one does because it's a comedy of errors. In the most traditional sense of the term, they're literally making errors as they go along on their journey to try to not fix this, but cover it up. And the performances are really good. Michael Abbott Jr. plays Zeke. He's the main character here. Firmly, this is not an ensemble piece. It's about him. Even though it does cut away from him to follow the cops a little bit, he's the main character. He's the one we see. And it's an excellent performance. He is very, very good here, in a way that is both desperate and empathetic. He finds a lot to empathize with his character. He gets fully into that role.
So, like, even though they're making mistakes, we feel bad for him, and like we want them to tell the truth and get this behind them, but they're going about it in such a wrong way that you want to kind of strangle them and be like, why are you doing it this way?
Right,
but
exactly.
When you're in the heat of the moment and you are making mistakes, covering up crimes, your brain's not thinking properly, and so you're doing the most asinine things, but you're unaware of it.
Yeah, exactly. You're so desperate that you're not able to. Yeah. So and then Andre Hyland, really fun, kind of in a Danny McBride way, as his friend Earl. Apparently, this guy has a lot of kind of personas, and this is an interesting one. I feel like he probably watched something like Pineapple Express or whatever.
Probably.
And they mentioned David Gordon Green, who directed Pineapple Express, as being one of the inspirations on this. And it's visually very similar. Again, it kind of reminds me of Tim Orr's work with Green in terms of how it sets the tone and really captures Alabama well. It's not just making everything a cartoon. There's a lot of colorful characters here, but it's not. The
lawnmower lady.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
The lawnmower lady was probably one of the funniest shots.
Yes,
I've seen all year.
Right in the middle, there's this non sequitur shot of a woman mowing her lawn, and she is mowing. She lives on a hill, so she's mowing the hill by having this cord, and she's literally. She's hanging the lawnmower by the cord and pulling it up very slowly so that she can mow her grass. Anyway,
so good.
It's the most hilarious. And I leaned over to Chase. I was like, "Please mow your lawn like that from now on. Just sit right on the inside of the house, have a big cord, and just start pulling.
Just start pulling it."
Yeah. Anyway, performances. So Michael Abbott Jr. good. Andre Hyland really good. Virginia Newcomb, solid work as Lydia, Zeke's wife. I thought Sarah Baker was having a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, she was.
In a major way. Janelle Cochran, who played the older officer, had the kind of performance that reminded me in many ways, much older character, but of Frances McDormand in Fargo. This very, she's very down south, homebody kind of, but she's incredibly sharp.
Right.
And that was the genius of Fargo, was making this down south character extremely kind of breaking down any sort of expectation you could have of this bumbling cop. Very, very sharp, and I like that a lot. Jess Wexler shows up in this. I like her a lot in the movies that she's in. So, everything about this thing worked for me. At any point, it could have fallen apart. This whole thing was, again, sort of like Swiss Army Man, an even better movie, I think, than Swiss Army Man. It's constantly on that kind of edge of totally falling into disrepair. If you didn't have actors who were taking it seriously enough...
Oh, they are 100% committed.
Yes.
If you do not take this seriously in the way they did, it would have fallen apart the instant they reveal how he died.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they carry it with a straight face.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, what?
Yeah, and it's amazing. And yeah. I love this. I can't wait to see it again. Honestly, I could easily watch this again.
Comes from May 24th, so hopefully they'll release it in your area.
I mean, yeah, I don't know when they do that. There's no word on that yet. But
I'm actually really curious because we have a lot of people that listen outside of the U.S., and I'm wondering how you guys get A24 films.
Yeah, I know that a lot of them open much later. They just... Right. I know that a lot of you in the UK who are listening to us just got 8th grade in March or April.
Right.
So we got it last July.
And we have to stress this enough. If you like Swiss Army Man, you'll love this one. Yeah. If you hated that, you will not like
stay
this.
Far away. I'm telling you, I think it is incredibly... I think it's relative in that way because because I like this even more than I like Swiss Army Man. We were both pretty big fans of that, and I think we both are on the same field there. We like this one more. And I think it actually works in the opposite way. If you don't like Swiss Army Man, this movie is discomforting and absurd and weird and heartbreaking and honestly kind of in some ways disturbing enough that you're not going to get along with it. In pretty much any way except for I think you could still like performances and stuff. But yeah, I'm
gonna make a bold prediction. I think you and I are going to be in the minority.
Probably.
When this is released finally, I think the majority of the people that we follow are going to hate this movie.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. But I'm sticking by it. I love this movie, and I'm giving it an A. But
same.
Yeah, we're on the same wavelength here. So, in any case, my favorite film was The Death of Dick Long. What would you say yours is?
I would probably have to go with that.
Okay.
I think it's a better made film than Brian Banks, but I would go Death of Dick Long, American Factory, and then Brian Banks, and that's my solid 3.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, my top 2, I don't know what my third one would be, probably Brian Banks. I think we probably have the same
right.
ones, honestly. Different order, but maybe, although maybe not. But, yeah, fantastic movie, and fantastic finish to the film festival. So,
yep.
I really liked it, and really, solid. It's an okay festival.
It was okay.
It was definitely not as banner as last year. I also think that it fell short of 2014. I think I thought it was a really strong slate. I think I missed 2 years. I think I was wrong in my estimation once. I think I missed 2 years of this. I didn't attend the festival in 2017. I did screeners for it, and I didn't really see a whole lot, so I can't really judge that one. But I did like. 2012 was okay. That was my first year. I wasn't able to get into some of these galas because they were so expensive. I wasn't anywhere near press, anything like that. So I had to pay. There was a few years where I had to pay for tickets, and so I had to pick and choose. But I think I picked all the least interesting ones in 2012. It was an okay year, but 2013, 2014 really strong. Last year was amazing. This was probably the weakest slate I've seen since I can't really judge 2017 since 2012 for me. Right. Better overall selection. I think they were strapped in terms of more interesting projects in 2012. They couldn't get a lot of high profile stuff. So
yeah, they had one A24 film. They had one Bleecker Street. Last year we had like 4 A24. We had Amazon. We had a bunch of heavy hitters, but I don't know what happened, man.
Right.
But it'll always be great for me because of my engagement. But I think for the most part, we agree it's kind of a lackluster festival year. But Joel, guy coming to an end, so
yes.
Take us out.
Yeah, so next week we are reviewing Ugly Dolls early. I'm just kidding.
No!
No, next week is the big one, the thing that Chase has been looking forward to, the thing that he's going to cry his eyes out during.
For 11 years now.
Yes, Avengers Endgame at least a storyline comes to a close, not the whole thing, but a storyline does. And
Bob Iger loves money too much.
Yes, I can't wait.
Yeah,
I've seen it on Friday. You're seeing it in less than a week now.
Yep. Thursday night.
Yeah, mine is a week and 4 hours from now. So I'm excited, and then we'll be having that podcast on Saturday morning. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of time since I have to see it at 4:00 and it's 3 hours long and there's 20 minutes of trailers.
Well, it's probably going to be a lot to discuss. So I'm glad we're going to give us like a 2-day buffer room to like really kind of stew on it. Cause just like with Infinity War, I feel like there's going to be a lot to talk about.
Yeah. It's going to be great. I'm tons of theories in my head. Anyway, that's it for this episode. It's been 273. Where can people find you online, Chase?
Yeah, if you guys want to follow me on Twitter, it's at RealChaseLee. Follow the podcast Twitter feed at RealMeAndPodcast. And of course, for this podcast itself, whether you're listening to on CastBox, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, wherever, we really appreciate that. And please spread it around and let people know this is your favorite movie podcast to listen to. Joel, where can people find you online?
You can find my writing at joelonfilm.com. By the time people are listening to this, I should have reviews. So 3 movies from the festival that we saw have already opened in limited release. You had Her Smell, Girls of the Sun just in the past week, and then Sorry Angel back in February. So I'm reviewing those now. On my website, I'll be posting those. Otherwise, you can read them at DallasMovieScreenings.com, where all of my coverage was. I've got 2 more reviews to write, Shadow and the Death of Dick Long, so those should be coming up. As for my website, the other review I'm going to be having, and I'm hoping to write it tonight, is Sunset. So I'm going to write that and maybe have those 4 out. We'll see how I'm feeling after I write the other 2 reviews. If not, I'm going to have to not review Sunset because I don't have time this weekend. But yeah, so there. And then on Twitter at Real Joel Copling, on Letterboxd at J Copling. Again, DallasMovieScreenings.com. I have a lot of writing there, and I've got some reviews coming up too, non-festival stuff. So that'll be it.
All right. Well, let's end this one and get ready for Endgame because that's what's coming up next. So this has been episode 273 of the Real Man Colon Movie Podcast. I'm Chase. That is Joel. We'll see you guys next week for the big one, the summer kickoff movie. But until then, let us know down below what you thought of all the coverage that we did for you guys. You guys are awesome. Stay awesome. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.